Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to the Mobile Employee Timesheet. In this week's training, I'm going to show you how to create this incredible time tracking employee sheet complete with time scheduling and mobile integration, complete with employees, time clock in and out, and a mobile calendar. It's going to be an incredible training. I cannot wait. So let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining me on this incredible training, the Mobile Employee Timesheet. I'm going to show you how to create this application. I'm going to show you how to sync it both ways with a brand new mobile application that I'm going to show you how we created, and it's going to sync to Excel and back to your mobile application. And that's going to mean employees can both clock in, clock out, assign projects, and automatically update this information inside Excel. And we're going to show you how to put all that together inside a schedule like this with dynamic and custom projects, along with types and a legend here, so we know who's been clocked in, who's been clocked out, who's running over, and who's in overtime. And of course, a single click back to get back to that particular time entry, along with the filters. We'll be able to filter by projects or name. We'll be able to select employees and select those time entries on a per employee basis. So when we select it, we'll also be able to show you how to use this really cool pop-up calendar, and along with a time picker, we'll have a really cool time picker so we can easily clock them in and out very easily like this. Okay, great. And of course, we're going to be able to save it, adding pictures to that, employee pictures. We'll be able to save entries, create brand new entries, tie that and customize it to the data. And of course, we're going to be able to view a time log, so we can view and print a time log based on any type of date range. Okay, so we've got a lot to show you. I hope you'll stick with us on these trainings. I do bring these to you each and every Tuesday, absolutely free. In fact, this template is also free to you. All you need to do is click the link down below in the description and then send us your name and email so we know where to send that up. You can use your email or with Facebook Messenger, and we're going to get that sent over to you right away. I just ask a few things, the first of which is if you could subscribe. That'll help us a lot. Go ahead and click that subscription button below, and of course the notification icon bell. That'll ensure that you get these trainings notified each and every week. Comment below. I reply to each and every comment, and I love to hear your feedback, your ideas, or if you have any ideas for new trainings, I also want to hear that. And don't forget to smash that like button. That helps us out, and I do appreciate that. All right, we're going to get started right away on this. If you are new to VBA and you want to learn, I tend to teach advanced VBA skills when we create these projects, but if you're new and you want to learn VBA from the ground up, one of my great friends, Daniel Strong, who's been doing this a long time, he teaches some incredible VBA. In fact, he's got a 30-hour plus VBA course. Even if you know nothing about VBA, this is a great course for you. He's been really kind enough to give me an incredible discount for all of our Excel for Freelancers followers. I'll include that link down below, so if you want to learn VBA, that's a great way to do that. All right, let's get started on this training. We'll go over a brief overview, and then we're going to get right into how we created this and how you can create your own applications. It starts out with an admin screen. Okay, we need to know a few things, and we've got them all centered here inside our administration screen. Okay, so what we do is we also want to know where the specific folder is, right? We're going to be syncing with a mobile application, right? So we've got to know where the data is stored, and that's going to be in a Dropbox file. And so once we create our application using AppSheet, we're just going to store it in a file like this, and we'll have different applications, and we're going to be focused on something called Employee Timesheet Tracker. So everything's going to be stored in here. Inside that folder, we have application data, we have a desktop information, we have employee images, and we've got a few other information. So we're going to show you how to use all that, but everything is stored there. So I need to know that location. We're going to need to browse for that location. We're going to need to put that file path right here. I also need to know the mobile data. Now there's data that's created, and that mobile data is saved on an Excel file. It's going to look just like this, a basic Excel file. It's going to have a few different sheets. It's going to have a timesheet, some projects, and employees, right? So we want to know all the information that we have, and it's going to be stored on this. So we need to make sure that our application syncs with this mobile data. There's two different Excel files. One project that we're working on, including macros, and one basic Excel file, an XLS file, that XLSX file that actually syncs with the mobile data. So we're going to need to know that. And we're going to need to know where that full path is so that we know when we make updates that we can link automatically to it. So how are we going to do that? Well, the best way to do that is just to browse for the file and put that file path here. Also, we're going to be using some custom icons inside our scheduling. If you take a look at schedule, we've got some icons that denote whether they've been clocked in, whether they're clocked in but they're reaching the limit of overtime, or whether they're clocked out and they're in regular time, or if they've clocked out and used overtime. So we're going to be able to set those icons. If we want to browse, we want to put those icon names here, and we want to make sure that they're located inside a folder. So I've got those stored inside a folder, those individual icons, and I want to know the status of those. Okay. We also have a list of projects here. I want to know when we reach overtime. What is the number of hours and where we reach overtime? Anything after the number of hours will hit overtime. And what is that overtime rate? Meaning, what is the pay rate that we overtime? If their regular rate is $10 an hour and they're reaching overtime, we want to pay them time and a half, right, which is 1.5. That means we're going to be paying them $15 an hour for that overtime, right? We also have a workday schedule. This we're not using, maybe in future versions. I just put this here, but we're not going to use it. We'll use conditional formatting. This is something that maybe we'll add on our Patreon if you want to get additional features, a fix or focus, or you want PDF. Patreon's a great place to do it. Maybe I'll add in additional conditional formatting on Patreon so our Patreon members can get some added benefits on this scheduler here, so we can add in off days here. That might be helpful. All right, so we've got that just as kind of a placeholder for now. And so our timesheet entries, basically we have a list of employees. If we want to search for a specific project, we can search for a particular project, maybe one that starts with D, so we know that. Or maybe we want to add in additional, maybe we want to search for a name, right? If we want to search employee name, we want to know which employee starts with Jack, or that would be there. So we can filter by employees, or we can clear the search and show, oh, this should be Fredders. Let me update that employee name. We've got a list of employee names here. So we've got all these employee names here, and we've got also information about each employee, what type of employee they are, an hourly wage, phone number information for that employee, and a little picture, because we're going to be able to display those pictures inside the employees. Then we have a timesheet. This is where our data is held. This is what I wanted to change. Fredders, that's the right name. So the timesheet contains an entry log, meaning what kind of entry, right? The name, the project they've been assigned, what time and date they came in, time and date they clocked out, the total number of hours, the wage, and the total wages. Inside the timesheet scheduler, we have, as you saw that, we went over that. We'll be able to navigate to previous months or next month, and we'll be able to click on this month as well. We will also be able to filter by project. So if we want a specific project and we only want to show that project in the scheduling, we can do that. Or we can show all projects. And we can show a selected year, and we can also refresh the schedule. Okay, and the timesheet entries, which is our main screen. Once we select an employee, we can then select a timesheet entry. It's going to load the information. We can update the employee. We can add information in here. We can save or update the employee if we decide to make changes on that. We can then update the employee, saving that, or we can add new employees to that. It's going to update the database. We can also add brand new ones. We can calculate the total wages, the total regular hours, the total overtime, and the total wages. We can add and clear the picture for the employee, and we can also update information. We can also view that time log as you saw, print the time log, change the dates on it, refresh the time log, and a whole lot more. All right, so that's kind of the basic overview of what we're getting into. The first thing what I want to do is I want to be able to show you the basics of this employee timesheet. This is the foundation of it. This is how we track information. We can display it, track it any way we want. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get into the mobile integration, how we created an app, and how we go about customizing that app, and how we sync that app with Excel both ways, how this Excel application can sync with your mobile and any employee, and how those employees can automatically sync back into Excel. Okay, great. We did cover something a little bit like this, like the driver, but we're going to be expanding on that. We had a mobile driver and field service application just a few weeks ago, but we're going to be expanding on that. So if you saw that, it would be great. If not, no problem. We're going to go slow step by step with this training. Okay, so the first thing what we do is I want to have an employee list, and this is based on a filter, right? If I filter a certain name and I want to know, like I want to know all names that contain L, I can do that, right? And it's going to show you just those names that contain L. We're going to have a little bit of a pointer here, or we can clear the search. Okay, so the first thing what we want to do, now these names are all populated based on names within the timesheet schedule, based on this timesheet data. This is our database here where all those records are. And what I want to do is I want to run an advanced filter, because we're going to be basing it on a filter based on whatever they've entered here, assuming they've entered anything. If they haven't entered anything, we want all the names to appear here. Then what I want to do is I want to select a name, and I want to know only those date and time entries for that particular employee, right? So Mark Mason has 3 different entries, 3 different time entries, and I want to know all of those, okay? And I want to put them here, and I want to be able to select those and have those details appear inside here. Then I can make updates necessary. So how do we get that? How do we get this employee list? Well, we know that they're going to come directly from here, and we know they might be filtered. So what we want to do is we want to set up an advanced filter, and we want to set up some criteria that looks like this. And we also want to set up a name. Now keep in mind, if you've been following my videos, what I've done, I did not put a header in this one because what I'm going to do is I'm going to match, basically, it's going to make it easier for us. Normally I put in a header at the type sheet called timesheet database or something like that in row 1. Then row 2 has the headers, but this time I'm changing it up a little bit because what I want to do is I want to mimic the data that's been created by our mobile application. I want to mimic the exact rows and I want to mimic the exact columns. And that's why we've structured it in this manner this time, because it's a little bit easier on the coding end when we do that, and I'll explain that as we move further into this training. Okay, so what we want to do now is basically I want to create a criteria. Now, because we have multiple criteria, we might be searching by name, we might be searching by projects, right? So what I need to know is that criteria header has to be dynamic, right? So when we look back in the timesheet, we need to know this is going to be a linked. This is our criteria. Now make sure that those drop-down list names must equal the exact name here and must equal the exact name here, right? If I say project here and I say projects somewhere else, it's not going to work. The spelling must be unique because the names in the header must also match here, right? So if I change this to project, we see because it is linked here, it's automatically going to change because this is linked to timesheet entries E3. Then what we want to do is we want to have the value that the user entered, right? If I want to search for a specific project and I want to enter that project here, like let's say, I know one of them is bridge, right? If we do a bridge, right? And I want to know only the people that worked on that specific project, I want to filter it based on that project. And so inside our timesheet database, I want to have any project that contains the word bridge. And if we see here, we've got bridge repair, bridge repair, bridge repair here. So I want to make sure that all of those names, the unique names that listed, are listed here. So that means if Fred works 5 times on that particular project, his name's going to only show up once here because I want those unique names. I will then want to take these names and I want to bring them directly inside here and paste them right here. Okay, so let's get into the VBA code that shows you just how we do that. We're going to go into the Developers tab, Visual Basic, or Alt F11 is a shortcut to get you there, and we're going to take a look directly inside here, this time entry macros here, time entry macros here. Actually, let's go, yeah, that's the one I want here. And we're going to scroll all the way up. And the first one, we've got some variables that we'll focus on as we go. But what we're going to do is we're going to run the macro called employee load list, employee load list. And I've got several modules that we're going to go to. We've got a few that we're not going to go up to, pop-up calendar and time picker. Those are the 2 modules that run this. So that's the one that runs this, time picker here and date picker here. Those we're not going to go into because they're not integral parts of this project. I do have dedicated trainings on those that I did many, many years ago. All right, so continuing on. So what I want to do is run that advanced filter. We need to first determine the last row. But before we do that, what we want to do is we want to make sure to clear out all the values here. And not only that, I've got this little pointer shape that's kind of helpful a little bit. It's called employee pointer, right? We're pointing, right, to employee. It's kind of a nice little feature. So this particular pointer is the shape and it's called employee pointer. I also want to hide that too temporarily. So we're going to do that. So what we want to do is we also want to clear out the conditional formatting. There's conditional formatting that runs this. If we highlight these cells and we go into the home, and we go in conditional formatting, we manage rules, we're going to see several conditional formattings. The first is one based on the selected row. Now that selected row is located in B5. So if I select over here, we can see that B5 contains that selected row, select row employee. When I make a selection on a cell, that row, like 6, is going to go directly inside B5. Conditional formatting is then going to trigger, and it's going to give it this blue color with white font. Okay. The other 2 are simply alternating rows based on the odd row or the even row, and we're giving it a color and giving it a border as long as D contains a value, right? So so that means as we continue to add information here, you see that we're going to be able to trigger that conditional formatting on those odd rows. Okay, great. So we understand that. So what we want to do is the first thing in that macro is just simply clear that out. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing here, clearing out that selected row in B5 and also clearing out any of the values. Okay. Now we're going to focus primarily on the timesheet database because that's where we're going to be running our advanced filter. And it is that filter that we're going to do. So we want to make sure we determine the last row using column A. And we want to make sure that there is actual values in there. So the last row is based on column A. I want to make sure if it's less than 2, we're going to exit the sub, right? It has to be greater than 2. We're going to run that advanced filter. I only need to run it to column C, right? We're only going to be filtering out either names or projects. So we're going to go from A to C, and that's it. And all we're going to be doing is running that criteria from K1 to K2. That's the criteria we went over. And then we want the results coming into L1. And we want unique because I want only the unique names, not all the names that are associated, only the unique ones, right? I don't want Mary 3 times, right? I only want it once. Okay, we're going to get the last results row of that from L. And then if it's less than 2, we're going to exit the sub. We want to make sure that we do have results. I'm going to bring those results directly over into column D. We're going to start out at D5. We're going to go to the last results row and we're going to add 3. We're adding 3 because our first results start in row 2 here. Our first results start in row 5 here. So we need to add 3 to compensate for that difference. And we're just going to simply use a value to value exchange, bringing the employee name over there. Great. Now what I want to do is I've just brought all these names here, but what I want to do is I want to determine what is the selected employee. Is there a particular timesheet entry? Notice we have Mark Mason here selected. So when I run that macro, I want to make sure that if Mark Mason is available, I want to make sure that he gets selected, right? So how do we know that, right? So I just ran this macro right here. I just ran the macro and I want to select Mark Mason. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look in this column. I'm going to look for whatever's here inside J6. I'm looking for this. If it's found, I want to know what row, and I want to select on that, right? So here's what we're going to do that in VBA. The first thing what we're going to do is we are going to add on-air resume next in case it's not found. We're going to put B5, right? B5 here is simply equal to the time entries D. We're going to use the find command. What am I looking for? I'm looking for whatever is in J6. J6 is the employee name. I'm going to look directly in column D. If it's found, I want to return the row, and I want to place that row directly in B5. Perfect. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to make sure that we're going to select it. Once I've put it in, I want to select it. If B5 does not equal empty, then D and whatever that row is, we're going to select. What happens then? When I make that selection there, it's going to load in those times. That's the next macro we're going to go to. How do we know that? Well, we use the selection change event, right? When I make a selection, I want to know all Fred's entries. When I make a selection to Mark, I want to know all of Mark entries. And that's based on a selection change from D5 all the way down, considering that there is a value. So that happens on selection change, right? Inside the worksheet itself. So when we look inside the time entries worksheet and we go on the selection change, we're focused on the selection change. It's found up here, selection change, right? We're going to be focused on column D, right? So on employee selection, load those time entries. That's what I want to happen. The first thing I'm going to do is make sure that B5 contains that target row. That's going to trigger the conditional formatting. The next, I want to place that little pointer. You saw that little pointer shape called employee pointer. I need to place that on the row that was selected. So we can do that. We can focus on that shape, employee pointer. We're going to set that left position based on E in the target row left. We're going to place that top position on E in the target row top, and then we're going to make sure it's displayed. Okay. All right. And then if they select anything else, we want to make sure that this here is if they select anything else. If the calendar is displayed, we're going to hide it. If the time picker is displayed, we're going to hide it. So what does that mean on selection change? That means if they select something and they select something else, I want to hide it. If they select the time picker and they select something else, I want to hide it. So that's what those two are there for on selection change. Then what we're going to do is once we've done that, then I want to run a macro called time entry load list. This macro is going to load the list here. And I also want to check one other thing there. I want to know if I is column hidden, then time log refresh. What do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look inside the time log. Here's our time log. So, and basically what we're going to be doing with this macro, which we'll get into in a bit, is we're hiding certain columns. Notice we go from column H to column S. So we have our time entry located from column I all the way to column, let's say Q or P, right? And so what we want to do then is I want to hide those columns and I want to show the time log. So the idea is this. If they've selected here, if we know that column I is hidden, that means this time log is displayed. In that case, what I want to do is I want to refresh the time log based on these dates. And we'll get into that macro shortly, but that's the difference. So basically now when they select something, the time log refreshes. And that's exactly what I want because I want to know the time log of all of that. Okay, great. So we have that. And we understand that's why we have it. So we're going to run a macro only if column I is hidden. Hidden equals true. Then we're going to run this macro to refresh the time log. That macro will be getting into in a bit. Okay, that's why it's here. But we're going to focus on this macro. This macro is what we're going to be doing, and that is that macro that loads this list of times. As we select an employee, we want to load the list of times. Now, where are those times coming from? They're coming directly from our timesheet, right? But in this case, I only want to know the times in and out for a specific employee. So I want to know if Mary, I want to know all of Mary's, or I want to know all of Fred's, or whoever. So what we need to do is we need to put in another criteria. And this is going to be based on this name. So whenever we make a change, that name is going to appear here. So if I take a look and I select Anita, it is that Anita that is going to be displayed directly inside here. That is the criteria that we want to use. Now we could use VBA to place that name here, but we can also use a formula. Why is that? Because I know the row, right? I know that it's going to be in column D. And I also know the row. So if I combine column D and I know the row, all I need to do is use indirect, or I could use index, that's going to be displaying whatever's in column D and 6. So we're going to use indirect for that. So here inside the timesheet, you can see that if there's an error, we're going to return nothing. But we're going to use indirect. We're going to timesheet. Here's the column that's going to be found on. What's the row? The row is located in B5. So we're going to return that, and it's going to be A1 style, so we're going to return true on that. So that is going to give us, that indirect function is going to give us the name there. It's always going to be accurate. So now what I want to do is I want to run an advanced filter. I want the results to come directly in here. I want to know the log ID, the time in and the timeout, and I want to bring all that information over, and I want to bring it directly inside here. Now it's actually, that log ID is actually located on column E. However, it's been hidden, right? So if I change the format, if I'm going to highlight these cells here, let's choose one with a little bit more data. Here, Mark's got a few other ones. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to highlight these cells, and I'm going to go into home, and then we're going to notice it's a custom format. If I move into more number formats, we see that it has 3 semicolons. If I were to erase that and then click OK, you're going to see that now those time entry IDs, these are the IDs associated 12, 11, and 5. These are the same IDs that are associated here, 12, 11, and 5. And they're going to get them directly from the IDs 12, 11, and 5. Okay. All right. So we see that. So basically what I want to do is I want to hide them, and I can do that with a custom format. So to do that, all we need to do is just go in more number formats, go into the custom, and then put in our 3 semicolons. Click OK, and they're going to be hidden. Okay, that's great. We can also change the font color to the same as the background. That's another way to do that. Okay, I use both. All right, so we see that we want, and that's important, right? Because when I select a time entry, I need to know that entry ID, and I need to place that entry log ID directly inside B2. So it is the macro that we're going to go over that's going to load that thing. So the first thing I want to do is clear all the contents out of here. And that's just what we're going to be doing inside the macro. So going back into the time entry macros, we did the first one, employee load list. Now what we're going to be doing is called employee time entry list. Okay, then we'll get into the filters a little bit. Now, this filter, right, we'll go into it. It's just a simple search. When we change this to enter search, that is this button here, clear for it. It's going to put enter search back in here, and it's going to load everything else. That's all we have to do for this macro right here, single line. Load list, this is the one where we're going to load the time entries for the selected employee. We already know the criteria. We've already seen the criteria. It's been set directly here in N, and we see where the results are going to go inside from P through R. So that's all we're going to do, setup. Just as we did before, like getting the last row, making sure that we have data. So this time we're going to set that range from A1 through H. A1 through H, because I need to make sure that we have the log, the time in, and the time out. Setting the criteria from N1 to N2 and having those results come from P1 through R1. So right in here, bringing those results here. Then we're going to determine the last row based on column P. If it is less than 2, we're going to exit the sub. Then what I want to do is sort. I want to have the newest log on top, and I want to have the oldest log on the bottom. So I want to run a sort based on descending based on P2. So that's what we have here. So we're going to focus on that sort. So that sort is simply going to be with sort. Let's bring that over a little bit. With sort, right, we're going to clear any existing sorts out. And then what I'd like to do is I would like to then set that key. That key is going to be based on P2. That is going to set it up so that it is our log ID that we're going to be placing it. Once we do that, I want to then set it as descending, right? Descending is important because I want the newest first based on the log ID. So the order is going to be descending. I'm going to set that range from P2 all the way through R in the last row. It's going to set the range of that sort. It's going to apply that sort. We're going to sort them. Once they're sorted, all we need to do is bring them directly inside our time entry sheet. You're going to take P2 in the last row and bring them directly in. We're adding 4. Again, our time entries start on 6. Here they start on 2, so we need to compensate for 4. And that's it. That's all we have to do when we make a selection change. It's going to bring in those details. All right, the next step, now what I have is, now that I've got these time entries, I want to be able to select on one of them and load that up directly here. We know that time entry log ID is located right here. And I want to place that directly up here in log ID. Then what I want to do is I want to extract the row from it using a named range. We go into the formulas. And the name manager, I've got something called entry ID. That is a named range based on our entry information. We tab over there. We see we've got an offset formula, dynamic named range using entry log ID. And that's right here. Okay, so that's going to get us our name. So what I want to do is I want to know what row it's on. We know that they start on row 2, so we need to add one, but we're going to use the match formula. We're going to be using B2. We're going to match whatever entry log ID is here. We want an exact match, so it's going to be 0, and we're adding 1. Remember, we're adding 1 because our timesheet data, our first one starts on row 2. So if it's 1 here, I want to show row 2. It is that row that I want to return right here. And also, we want the next entry. When we add new ones, we're going to add the next entry. I'm going to show you how to do this with mobile as well, how to add a dynamic new on your phone as well. Great, so we're going to run that max. And then I also want to know the selected row. That is going to be that selected employee right here. So I want to know what row employees. I want to make sure that we have an accurate employee. So I want to know the row here. It is right here. So also, we want to know what row we've selected here. When we select a row, I want to put what row that is, and it's going to be the selected entry row here. So notice B9 will change from 7 to 8. So we want to make sure that we have that. Okay, so that's going to be it. So when we make a selection, we're going to do 2 things. One, we're going to put that row directly in B9. Conditional formatting is going to handle that, right? When we look in conditional formatting, we see that it is inside right here. B9 equals the row. Same thing, same additional conditional format as we had before. So let's look in the selection change event, and we're going to focus on that, on column F through G. So we're going inside the time entries, and we've already focused on this before. Now we're going to scroll down and focus on F through G. We want to make sure that the user makes a selection on F through G, and we want to make sure that F contains a value. B9 is going to take on that target row. That will trigger conditional formatting. I also want to put that entry ID. Remember, it's located in column E. It's hidden, and we're going to put that directly inside B2. What that's going to do is automatically trigger that row, assuming that it is a correct ID, and it's going to present a row for us. Okay, once we have that, I want to make sure also if the time log is hidden, I want to know, then we're going to show or hide the time clock. So what do I mean by that? Let's say we're viewing the time log, and then I want to show this. I want to automatically run a macro that's going to trigger and display that. So that's why we're going to run it. We're going to run this particular macro is basically going to show the time entry. We'll be getting into that soon. So what we want to do is just show that. So next up, we're going to do entry load. Entry load is simply going to load all of the information right here. So how do we do that? Well, that's back inside that module where we just were, and that's the next macro that we covered. We just covered time entry load list, and now what we're going to do is I'm going to scroll down and skip a little bit just because we're going to go down here, and we're going to go to that load one. That's the one I want to do, entry load, because that's the next macro in order. So the first thing what I want to do, we'll go back up and cover those, the save and the new entries and all that. So the first thing what I want to load is I want to clear out all the information on the existing time entry form. So best is we're going to do that. We will then clear out the contents of all the associated fields so that it clears everything out accordingly. Keep in mind that employees have a picture, right? That picture contains a file name. And that file name is kept directly inside B6. B6 is that. And I also want to know what employee row, this is the one I was looking at, employee row. If I've selected an employee, if I decide to change that employee, I need to make sure that that employee is located here, of course, on our employee list here. And I want to make sure to know what row that is on. So if I select an employee, I want to make sure the row. And we can use our match formula to do that. So if I take a look inside here, the employee search row, we're going to see if we're matching it based on J4, right? When I select an employee, I need to make sure that the employee they selected is saved in our database, and it's not an incorrect name. So what we're going to do is run that match. Based on J4, the employee name 0, we want exact match, and adding 1 because we want the row associated. As long as it's not empty, we know it is a correct employee and a correct row. And I also want to know the next employee ID. If I create a brand new employee, I need to save and update that using the next ID. Great, so let's get back into that selection change. We see that the entry load, we're going to run that macro. What I want to do is when I load an employee, I want to clear any employee picture out, right? If I'm loading an employee, let's take a look inside here. Notice that there's a shape here. It's called employee picture. It's a picture. It's always the same name. So when I make a change, I want to make sure that when we load it, that picture changes, right? At least we remove the existing one. So we're going to do that. If it doesn't exist, it could create an error. So we've wrapped it in on error, resume next, and on error, go to 0. Okay, next up, what I'm going to do is I want to check the B3. B3 is critical. B3 tells us the row, the entry row, where all that data is located. This one's located on row 13. All this. So if we go into the timesheet, we see on row 13, all that information is located here. So it's that information that we're going to load up, and we need to make sure that it contains a row. If it's blank, then we know we cannot move ahead. So we're just going to let the user know if it's empty to select the correct entry. We're going to exit the sub. We cannot move on. We're going to turn off application screen updating. We're going to extract that row into a variable called entry row. Next up, I want to load the employee details, right? I want to take that. We're not using data mapping in this case. I want to take the employee name that triggers the employee load. So whenever that employee name, I want to put it directly inside J4. And that means whatever employee is located directly in B, I want to put it inside J4. So J4 is going to take on whatever's in B in the entry row. That will automatically trigger the employee name. How do we know that? How do we know that? Because as soon as I make a change here, we're going to load that employee. How does that work? Well, that works on the change event based on J4. So let's take a quick look at that and see how that's going to work. We're going to focus on, again, back inside our time entries sheet here. We're making a change, a worksheet change, and we're focused on J4. On employee change, load employee details. So when J4 is changed, and we want to make sure that J4 is not empty, and we also want to make sure that B7 is not empty. B7 is our employee database, right? If it's empty, that means there's an error. So assuming it's not empty, there is a specific row that is then tied to that employee. We can put that row in a variable called employee row for B7. And then all we need to do is take that employee name, and I want to push it directly inside J6. Next up, I want to take the email, the type, the hourly rate, and I want to place it all directly inside the cells accordingly. So we've got a lot of information for employees, but we'll start out with just the type, the hourly wage, and I want to put that email directly in there. So that's all we're going to be placing in there in those fields here. You can build this out and add additional information if you want. So we're going to, the hourly wage is going to go into M6, the email is going to go into J8. The employee type is going to go into M8, and the employee picture is going to go into B6. We've also got an employee picture. That is a picture that's associated with employee images, right? If we take a look inside our data folder, right, and we take a look inside employee images, we've got a bunch of images. So we've got some employee images. This one's a default we may use in the future, but we've got the employee images here. And so what we want to do is make sure that we save not only the name of it, but the folder that's inside employee images. Now, keep in mind, this is a little tricky, kind of messed me up a little bit. For the database importance for the mobile, notice that is a forward slash, not a backslash, a forward slash. So keep that in mind. Folder, forward slash, and the name. So that's what I want to store inside the database. And I want to bring that, basically when we're loading it, I want to bring that directly inside and place it directly inside B6. So employee names, Lisa. So that's where it's going to go. And then, of course, we're going to run a macro. So changing that, let's take a quick look at that. So B5, and then if B6 value doesn't equal empty, we're going to run a macro that's going to show the employee picture. I'll go over that in just a moment. So that's how we trigger all this information. And now let's go back inside the time entry macros, right? So moving forward, so we see how J6, we see how the employee name will automatically trigger, right? As soon as we add that in, it's automatically going to trigger that. Okay, continuing on. So we've got all the information in here as we load it on. We're going to go back into it, back into the time entry macros here. So we see how the loading J4 here, right? It's going to trigger that automatically. We're going to take that project, coming from column C of our timesheet. It's going to go inside J15. And then what I want to do is I want to add in the date and the time. But here's a little bit of a tricky part. What I'd like to do is, from a user standpoint, I'd like in Excel at least to enter the date and time separately. It makes it a little bit easier. However, inside the database, as we went over in a previous training, I want the date and time stored together, both in and out. So what I'm going to do is use another cell to combine them very easily. So we're going to use this one right here. If we take a look inside B12, we see that B12 is the date and time. It's the combination of both the date in and the time in. And all we need to do is simply add them together. And we're going to create that. So B12 is both our date and time. B13 is the same thing, but it's based on our time out. So it is here J. Of course, that's going to be J13 plus M13, and that's our timeout. So B12 and B13 are actually going to contain our full data where we want. That's what we want to bring in. But we don't want to bring it in. I don't want to bring this data in here. I want to put it in here. These are formulas. We don't want to replace those. So how do we get the information from our timesheet? How do I separate this information into two different parts? One part containing the date, the other part containing the time, when they're both combined inside a single cell already. Well, what we can do is we know that in Excel, this is basically an integer along with a decimal. If I go into home and change this to general, you're going to see that it is a whole number with a decimal. The decimal is the time, the whole number is the date. So if I use integer, the integer command, we are going to then allow us to get that particular date. So that's just what we're going to do. And we're going to make sure that there's actually a value in column D before we bring it over. So that's just what we're going to do inside our code, making sure that if column D does not equal empty, then we know that there's a time in that it's not empty. J11, which is our date, is going to be the integer, meaning the whole number of whatever's in D. So that's going to get us our whole date, which is our whole number. Then I want to get the time. So the time is simply our full time and date minus the date itself, minus the integer. That's going to leave us with that decimal. That decimal is actually the time in, and we're going to place that directly in M11. We're going to do the exact same for the time out. Exactly the same thing, no different there. We're just placing it in different cells. And then we're going to do application screen update and true. Everything else is based on formulas. Once we have the date and the time in, we also have the project here in J15. Everything else is automated. We have the total regular hours, total wages, and the total overtime. So how do we extract that? Well, I'll show you exactly how. Well, what we do know is, what do we know? We know that we have our regular hour limit is 8 hours. And I've assigned this a name range called regular hours limit. So if the total hours are greater than the regular hours limit, then we have some overtime. If it is overtime, we need to multiply that times 1.5, the remaining hours. So if we take a look inside that, we have the total regular hours. How do we know that? Well, first of all, I want to make sure that we have all of the fields filled in, right? All of that. How do we know that if we have all four of those fields in? I'm going to use the count A. I'm just going to use count A to make sure we have values in J11, J13, M11, and M13. If it doesn't equal 4, meaning we don't have all the data filled in, then I'm just going to put 0, right? Only when these 4 fields are filled in do we actually want to calculate the regular hour. Now, if we know that they are, what I want to do is I want to subtract B13 minus B12, right? Our date and time out minus our date and time in. I want to multiply that times 24 based on the 24 hours in a day. When we multiply that, we're going to get the total number of hours worked. If that total number of hours worked is greater than our regular hours limit, then all I want to return is the regular hours limit, which is 8 in this case. Otherwise, it is less than or equal to the regular hours limit. In that case, I simply want to put B13, the minus B12, which is the total date and time out minus the time in, and then multiply that times 24. Okay, so in this case, right, we have additional, right? In this case, we had a lot of hours. We had 13, almost 14 hours. So what I want to do is I want to put 8 because we've got a lot of overtime from 12 a.m. to 2 p.m., right? It's a lot of hours there. So if it's just 12 a.m., let's make it simple here, right? Why not? 12 a.m., and then we'll put done, actually a.m., done. So here we've got, make it simpler, we've got 8 hours and we've got 6 hours of overtime. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to put that's our database being updated, and I'll show you that momentarily. So now I want the total overtime hours. How do I know that? Well, what I'm going to do is we're going to run another check. If the B13, if the time out minus the time in times 24 is greater than the regular hour limit, in this case it is, I want to subtract it out. I want to put that total time minus the regular hours, right? So we have, in this case, we have a total of 14 hours. So I want to take that 14 hours, I want to subtract 8 hours, and that's going to leave us with 6 hours. Otherwise, return 0. So we've got our total overtime. Now I want to figure in total wages. What are our total wages? Well, I know our hourly rate is 19 for this employee. So what I want to do is I want to do it in two parts. The first part is I want to multiply the regular hours times the regular rate. So we can do that with here. P13 times M6, right? That's going to give us our regular rate. Plus I want to add in any overtime, which is going to be P15 times the rate. So that's going to determine which is going to be there, P15, right? Multiplying that times P15. So if I know M6, of course, that's our hourly rate, times the overtime rate, which is 1.5. So that's going to get us our actual rate that we're paying them. Multiplying that times the overtime hour, that's going to get us our overtime amount right here. This is going to get us our regular amount here. So we add our regular amount plus our overtime amount, we get the total wages for that day or that shift. And we can put them right here. Excellent. So we've got that and we understand how we achieve that there. And we understand how we're going to be loading all the data and how we bring it all up. Fantastic. Okay, great. So we've got the load. Let's move back up to the top, just a few macros that we missed. And I'm going to focus on this save and update. Now you'll see something. When we make a saved update, I want to do two things. One, I want to save it to the timesheet. Obviously, we want to save the information here. And I also want to save it to an external database. What does that external database look like? It looks like this timesheet. Now, this is the external database that's synced with our mobile application. I'm going to be getting into that right now. When we create a mobile application using AppSheet, it creates automatically this particular Excel file. I added projects, that wasn't part of it. So timesheet, projects, and employees. This is the one, this is the basic XLS file that's located in our Dropbox file. I want to make sure that we update this as well. All the records sync automatically. They're exactly the same. Projects, employees are exactly the same as our app here, right? Timesheet, employees, and we have admin, we have our projects here. Okay, so how do we do that? Okay, so let's take a look inside that. So what I'd like to show you now is how we go about creating this sheet. How does that external data get created? And how do we create that mobile application that we're going to be able to sync? Well, if you followed some of my trainings, you're going to see that we use something called AppSheet. AppSheet is a great little application, and it's right here called AppSheet. So if we take a look inside that, www.appsheet.com, right? It's our main information center. And basically we have our own apps. It's brand new, it's free to use, right? Once you deploy applications, get into it, you will have to pay for it, but this is fully free. We can test it out, we can try it out for free. We can create a brand new app. I've created an app called Mobile Employee. Last time we created an app called Field Delivery. Now we're creating something here called Mobile Employee Timesheet. So how did I do that? Well, the first thing what I do is I started with a template, much easier. So we're going to make a new application, right? So what we wanted to do is we want to start with a template. So we started with a template here, and we want to make sure, sometimes I forget, make sure you scroll down and you click Dropbox, the database Dropbox, that's critical, okay? We can give it a name, we'll call it Test Training App. And then what I wanted to use is, last time we used Field Delivery, this time I want to use something a little bit different, right? I want to click on something called HR, Human Resources, because that's what we're going to focus on. And we see we have something called Timesheet Tracker, and this is the one I use. So we're going to click on Timesheet Tracker, and that's going to automatically set it up, and it's going to automatically set up data in our Dropbox. It's going to take just a few minutes to do that. Okay, and once it gets created, you may see some errors here, but they're easy to fix, and that's common sense. So it says, since your app does not have an allow list, you need to allow. So we need to do a few things first. So we can go directly to the problem, and it's asking us, says this is a public app. We'll select that. And yes, I'm authorized to set up the app. We'll select both of those. We're going to save that here. And once we have that there, we're good to go now. Now our app's created, right? And what do we have on this app? Well, let's take a look here on the right side. We see we have this mobile. We have a list of employees, right? We can change the look of it. We've got some sample pictures. We've got a clocked in, who's been clocked in. This helps us who's been clocked in. We can quickly clock out, right? Adding a clock out, or we can select it and clock out. We also have a calendar, so we know who's been clocked in and clocked out, and information here. So that's already given it to us. Now let's take a look inside the data, and we're also going to look here. Let's take a look inside the employee. This comes with two tables. We've got an employees and we've got a timesheet. So if we take a look inside employees, we see some information here, and we can click on the columns. And we see that we have employee columns. You have a row number, employee name, email, hourly rate, similar to what we have. Timesheet, we've got something similar a bit. Name, log ID, name information. So we've got that. So we have these information here. We've got these databases here, these tables set up, but where's our actual data? Well, we selected Dropbox, if you remember that. So if we take a look at that, we want to view the table, we see that we want to view the source, right? View the source is actually in our Dropbox right here. So it's actually located in the Dropbox. It isn't automatically created, and this is what it looks like when it's been created. And this is in my Dropbox because we've already synced. It'll ask you to sync the Dropbox. So when I go into there and we want to know what applications we can manage it, we can sync our Dropbox. We have integrations, so you'll want to make sure that you inside your integrations you sync your Dropbox and make sure you can do that. It'll ask you to sync it, so that's no problem. Okay, so we can sync our Dropbox. So now let's take a look inside our Dropbox folder. We're going to go back up here inside our data folder, and we see that we have this brand new test app, right? This brand new, this one right here, this one test training app. This is the one that just got created. We've got employee images, right? These are the pictures that we saw. So that's already in our Dropbox. We've got a table. This is an XLX file, right? SLX file. And we've got timesheet. So we're going to click on that, right? Oh, I've already got one open that's called timesheet. Let me close our copy of it. That's good. We don't need that. And I'm going to open up the one that we have here. So I'm going to open this up. They've got the same name. And here we see we've got our raw data. This is exactly the same. So this is our data. So we've got timesheet data and we've got employee data. Now, all I need to do is take our application and make sure that we update this. However, I've done some customizations. You'll see this one looks different, okay? So you see how we can quickly create a sample file, but now what I'd like to do is I'd like to go in and show you those customizations. So what I did is I created a sample and then I customized it. So taking a look inside here, this is our test training app. Okay, so we understand how to create the basic version, but what I want to do is I want to customize it. Now, let's say we want to add additional rows, or we want to add additional columns, or we want to add additional information. If we go here into my timesheet, right, which is the timesheet tracker here, this is the one that I created. Notice it's got a log ID. So if you want to add additional columns to yours, the best way to do that is simply to add them directly in the database, right? This XLSX file, add them here, okay? Give them names, then save it, right? And you can remember there's 3 different sheets on this. I added projects. I simply added a table here and just given a list of project very, very simply. And I added employees. Then all I did was save it. So my information looks different here. So you can see that. So once you've updated your database table exactly the way you want it, all you need to do is save it and close it. Then go into your application here. And let's go back into let's close this out here. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back into the main one. I'm going to go back into the one that I've created here, which is the one that we're focused on, mobile employees. So this is the one I've created. This is the one I've customized. And so this one right here, I'm going to show you how. So once we get into that, and you can customize it. Notice I've added custom icons and some information here. We're going to go into data here, and we're going to see employees, right? So like, for example, if you've made changes to employees and you select on the columns, right? What you want to do is you want to click on regenerate structure, right? You've made changes to the database. I've made changes to all 3 of these. So you're going to click on regenerate structure and it'll say, yes, do you want to regenerate? Yes. And what that's going to do is going to look for any changes you might have made to the database. So once you do that for each one of them, it's going to recognize those changes. And then all of a sudden, when you click columns, employees, those new columns are going to be here. Those brand new columns, you're going to see them here. Now, you might make some changes, but it's extremely intuitive, right? You'll see them here. They're all going to be here. You want to have which one's the name, which one's the key. All right, our names are all unique. And the same thing with our projects, right? So the same thing, notice projects, something I added here. And making sure the rows, the text, a number, it's going to add a row number and a list related timesheets. That's automatic. It's very intuitive. And our timesheet. So what I did is I clicked regenerate structure once I made those changes. And I made a few different changes. So I've added the project in here. Ref means it's referring to another table, referring to the projects. When I click on this, it's going to say, okay, it's project. What is it referring to, right? It's referring to the source project, right? Because I want to be able to select a project. What does that mean? When I select clock in, I want to select the name and I want to select a project, right? So to do that inside our timesheet where that data is, I need to know the name is referring to the employee name. So we're going to select on here. The name is referring to the employee name, right? That's the one we want to do. Projects is referring to the project. So we can refer it, and that's how we get the drop down list. So also we can just make them editable. So there's a lot of things that we can do inside this as we move around, okay? So we understand how to direct and how to update these. You can select, like, if it's a number, whatever the type is, the type of field, minutes and seconds. We don't use this too much, but everything is here. Some are hidden, some are virtual, meaning you don't see them on the table. Others are not. So all of our data is in these three tables here. And then you can customize the option. Notice I've added an icon here, right? We can go into the UI and add some information. In the branding, we can upload a file to our Dropbox, right? Inside our data file called logo. I've created a logo here and I've put it inside our Dropbox, and I've located it so you can just browse for the Dropbox here, and you can browse wherever you want. As long as it's in your Dropbox, you can take that logo and it'll automatically appear here. So I've added a logo. This is the launch image, right? When we launch the application, it'll automatically launch it. And of course, I've got employee pictures here, so we can really focus on the views. So notice we have employees, clocked in, meaning who's been clocked in already. If you're going to clock in, what employee is going to clock in, what information. And also, we want to have a calendar. If I want to select on a specific one, I know that Dave Davidson, this particular item here, this time entry, working on Daniel's garage, time in, time out, and the total hours. It's not quite accurate, but you get the point. Okay, so you see, as I messed around with the data a lot here, so we have different views. So when those views are all going to come here, we've got primary views here. Take a look at this: calendar, clocked in, and employees, right? So employees, I've got this particular employee view. If we take a look inside here, we can really customize this a lot. I won't be getting into too much, but we can compose a lot. So notice these little icons. Compose email if we want to create an email. If I want to edit the employee, I can just click edit, employee ID. If I want to call a phone number, right? If I want to move it around, like I want to put the phone number first, it's going to automatically switch that. So, and maybe we want a map of their address. If I want to click here, it's going to automatically load a map of their address. So we've got a lot of features here that we can use there. And so we can just add on to that. So each one of these views, I don't want to get too much into detail on this because it's a ton. I mean, we could spend months, literally months on this, and I'm learning myself. But basically, we can customize each view as we want here. So employee detail, employee form, projects, we can timesheet detail. They're all here. Okay, so the idea is this. When I make a change, let's say I decide I want to make a change. I want to clock somebody in. It's going to be a change to our timesheet database, not our employees. It's going to be a change to our timesheet, right? So what I want to happen is, let's say I decide that I'm going to clock in Fred here, and I'm going to give him a specific project. He's working on the John Hamm pool, and I want him clocked in, let's say maybe a specific date on the 23rd, okay, at 12 p.m. Okay, so, and then let's see, done that. So now notice we've got that, and I want to confirm that, okay? So what I want to happen is I want that information to come directly to Excel, and I want it to come inside a macro, right? So I want to bring it in, and I want to be able to do that. So when I select Excel and I select this mobile data sync, I want to bring that automatically inside here. So when I click on, again, Fred Fretters, I see that he now has worked on the John Hamm pool. Notice how we just synced it up. So we've got him here, right? And I also want to sync it another way too, right? So notice he's been clocked in at 12:20 p.m. He's worked on the John Hamm pool. Maybe I can clock him out from the mobile, or maybe I want to clock him out directly from here. So maybe I want to give him a timeout of, let's say, 8 o'clock p.m., right? So, and click done here. And now all we need to do is save that entry. It's automatically going to update the database. So now notice that he's been clocked out on the 23rd, right? So now if we go back into our app, and of course we refresh it here, we do need to save it, right? And make sure we refresh the data. It's automatically going to be refreshed. And once it is refreshed, we're going to be able to see inside the calendar. If we take a look on the 23rd here, and we see Fred Fretters, we take a look, we see he's on and he's been clocked out at 8 p.m., right? If we take a look inside this entry here, John Hamm pool, clocked in, clocked out perfectly, those hours. This is not accurate, but we're not using that, but we are using the one inside the application, which is accurate, which is total wage 153, hours, total hours, perfect. That's exactly what I want. I want this one here. This one will work on. Okay, so you see how it syncs both ways. One, we've created a brand new time entry and we've put it inside our application. We've also then made that clock out from our application and we see how it's been updated on the mobile device. So how do we get that done? Well, let's focus on the first part of it. And that was when we make an update to this, make any update. If we were to change this, right, let's say to this, how do we get that update to automatically go to our mobile app? Well, relatively easy. All we need to do, as you may have seen right there, all we need to do is make sure that we're not only saving that data directly inside here, right, inside our table, I also want to save it inside our mobile database, which is here, right? I want to make sure that they're both saved here. So any change that we make to our baby, I also want to make the change to the mobile app, right? We've got two different databases. One is our local database where our application is, and the other is our mobile database, right? I want to make sure they're separate and I want to make sure they're updated both. So that's what we're going to focus on right now because we know that any change we make to here automatically syncs with our mobile app. So remember, if I refresh this here, we see that it's not going to be John Ham Pool anymore. I could probably actually refresh it there. Now automatically it is going to be, we changed the project on that. So it's simply refreshing the screen. We'll go back into the calendar. We'll take a look on the 23rd and we're going to see that this particular project is now Daniel's Garage. So we see that the changes are very quick and very automatic and very easy because we know we have the linked database, right? This database is coming directly from Excel, from that Excel sheet. Okay, great. So let's take a look inside that macro because that's the next macro that we want to focus on, which is called entry, save, and update. When we make that update, when we save a new one or we update an existing one, which is this save, that's when things are going to happen. So let's take a look inside that. First of all, we need to make sure that we have an employee, right? If J6 is empty, right, we need to let the user know to please save an employee. So please make sure to add an employee. What I want to do is I want to get that mobile data workbook, right? That's very important. That's the one we need to update. That is the mobile data application that we focused on here. It's called Timesheet XLS. When we browse for that, all we need to do is just browse for that and we can put that directly in here. That's the one that's synced to the mobile. I need to know that particular XLSX file because changes there will automatically update our app. So we're going to put that in here and we're going to call that the data file, giving it a name range called data file. So we can go in here. We're going to set that up equal to the data file. That's going to put that path, I want to know that full file path, into a string variable. And now what I want to do is I want to make sure it's, first of all, that it's not empty and that the path is accurate by using the directory VB directory. If there's any errors, then let the user know. If it does not equal empty, just if it doesn't equal, then we're going to set the data workbook equal to the workbooks. We're also going to open it, open that existing workbook. Then what we're going to be doing is, okay, so that's it for the data workbook. Then we're going to focus again on back inside here. I just need to know, is this a brand new entry? Is it a new entry like this? Or is it an existing entry? I need to know that. And the differentiation is going to be based on B3 here. New entries, we're going to have B3 is going to be empty. Existing entries are going to contain the row. So B3 is going to tell us. If B3 equals empty, we know it is a new entry. If it is a new entry, we're going to assign a row to that called entry row to the first available row inside our database. Okay, that's going to be based on the timesheet data sheet. Okay, also what I want to do is I want to get that next entry ID. We know the next entry ID using B4 is going to be using the max formula. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that directly in that first row in column A here in that row. That's going to take on. So I'm also going to place it in B2. So B2 is going to take on that next entry ID and column A is going to take that on. We're going to turn application screen updating to false. That'll make things a lot quicker. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to add the data to the workbook, right? I also want to add a brand new row to our data workbook. So what we're going to be doing, checking to make sure that if it's nothing, right, making sure that we actually have it, A of our data workbook here, sheets timesheet, same sheet name, A, the same row. This is why the same row. This is what I like about it. We're using the exact same row. Both of them have always the same rows, the same columns. So we can use that. It's going to equal B2. We're setting that entry ID and we're only setting it for those new entries. Otherwise, it's an existing entry. If it's an existing entry, it already has a row. It already has an ID. All we need to do is put that entry row based on whatever's in B3. Everything else is the same. The first, we're going to update our local workbook. Then we're going to update our database. So all we're going to be doing is taking the information, employee name from J6, putting in column B, project in column C. We're going to check to make sure we have values in B12. It's not 0. And we're going to update, right? I'm going to take whatever's in here in date and time in, and I'm going to place it directly inside here, D and E. We're going to place that directly inside there. And it's going to come directly from B12. I just want to make sure that we have a value. And so D and E are going to take on both the time in and time out. We're going to put that total hours, and I want to put that in column F. F is going to take on what? If we take a look inside the timesheet, we see that F is our total hours. I want the total hours. And the total hours are simply here, our total regular hours combined with our total overtime hours. So we simply have to add in P13 and P15 together to get our total hours. So that's just what we do here. Adding in P13 here plus P15 is going to get us our total hours and putting that in column F. G is going to take that wage and it's going to come from M6. And H is going to take on the total wages, right? So I want to know the total wages. This is why it's important we have our accurate information here. Hourly wage and our total wages here. Total wages are going to come directly from M15. That's it. Okay, so that's all we're going to do. We're going to do the exactly same thing on our database here. So again, we're going to check to make sure that our database, Excel file database, and then we're going to do exactly everything the same, except this time we're calling out our data workbook. We could use with data workbook, I guess, in this case, and sheets might be easier instead of repeating. So in other words, we could do something like this with, right? We could do with and then paste it in here and then just do that, but I didn't. So keep that in mind. Don't always do that, but you could do that. Either way, we're going to list it. So basically everything here is the same except this we're saving it to the data workbook. Okay, last thing what we want to do is close that database workbook, closing that and making sure that we save it, which is true. Okay, good. Now what I want to do is I want to, once I've saved that, right, once I've made save, I want to make sure that we're saving the correct row. So once I've saved it, I want to make sure that we select the correct row. So notice we open it up, save it, and I want to select that row. How do I know which row to select? Well, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to determine what I want to know. If it's a new entry, what do I mean by saving that? If it's a new entry, and let's say, notice that Fred is selected here, right on the left side. But what if I decide I want to add David? I want to give David a brand new here. So let's say David's going to be clocked in on a particular project and we're going to set it to done. Okay, so now I've got Dave. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to select David here. I don't want to select Fred anymore. So I save that entry here. And I want to, so notice how Dave got selected automatically here. Isn't that nice, right? So now we see Dave, we see, and we also see that brand new time entry. Notice that it got automatically selected, right? So if I select something else and I select this one and I select, say this one and then this one, this is the one that we just created, right? So notice how it was automatically selected. What I want to do is I want to look for Dave. Once I add him, I want to look for him in this list. If it's found, I want to select that one. I want to select it. And then what I want to do is I want to select the ID. I want to select whichever one was loaded, whichever one we just created. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to set that selected row. I want to look for his name. Here's his name in J6, right? J6 is his name. What I want to do is I want to look for it inside column D. And I'm going to use the find command. So we're going to use the find to look for him. Find here. And we're going to select him. If we found it, we're going to put that row inside a variable called selected row. Now, if it's not 0, that means we did find him. I'm going to take D in the selected row and I'm going to select it. That means you can have VBA select this. As soon as I click on that, everything's going to happen. That selection change event is going to trigger and it's going to load automatically these. Now all we need to do is determine our entry log ID and find it. Remember, our entry log IDs are here, right? They're just hidden, right? But they're there. See, when I select on this, we see 16. So that's what we're going to do. So the first thing what I'm going to do is select the entry time row. So now what I want to do is, how do I do that? Well, B9 is our selected row, right? When I select here, B9, see it's 7 here, or in this case, 6 here, B9. I want to take whatever row it's been found. I want to look for that ID. Whenever it's found, I want to take that row and I want to put it directly in B9. So how do we do that? Well, again, I'm going to look for what? What am I looking for? B2. I'm looking for this 16. Where am I looking? I'm looking in this column here. If it's found on row 6, I want to take that row and I want to place it directly inside B9. So that's what we're going to do with this. Remember, here's the ID. We're going to find it. We're looking for it in column E. If it's found, we're going to extract the row and we're going to place that row directly in B9. That's it. That's all we have to do, right? So automatically we select the employee, we select the entry that we just created. So it's new. Let me show you that one more time, right? So I'm going to show you, I'm going to select, let's do David again. Okay, so let's select something on Peter, something very different. So new entry. So now what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to select Dave Davidson. I'm going to create another entry, this time let's say for the 27th, and we'll just select any time, it doesn't matter, and click done. And now a particular project, we'll go with a project. So what I want to happen automatically is I want this brand new entry to be selected. I want Dave to be selected, and I want this entry. So all we do is click save. It's going to create that, update that, and there it is right here. It's been automatically selected. So that's it. Okay, cool. So that's what that little does. It's really very user intuitive. Okay, turn on screen up beginning and then just run our entry save message. That's going to automatically save it, and you have a little fade out message there. It's probably hidden by one of these buttons here. Okay, I think it's behind this button, but okay, that's irrelevant. Okay, so that's this fade out message that we don't need to worry about. It's just a little message that will fade out over time. Just so you can see it, save entry, and we're going to save it, and then we can't even see it here. It's behind this. I put it in the wrong place. Okay, let's move it up so we can see it. I'm going to click on the selection pane here, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to look for that particular. It's called entry save message, and I'm just going to move it up here. There we go. And we have an employee save message that got hidden too. Let's bring that up here. Okay, there we go. Now we can see it. Okay, so now when I save the entry, we'll do the same thing for employee. It's going to fade it out quickly. You see that faded out? It's fading out. And we're going to do the same thing for employee. It's going to be disappearing in a moment. Okay, so that's gone. And now what I want to do is I want to do the same thing for the employee. Saving the employee. That employee is also going to be updated. And notice the employee save message also fades out. Very good. I'm glad I got to show that part to you. So that's just a fade out message. Next up on the macro, we want to browse for the employee picture. This is relatively basic, right? So when I create a brand new employee, I want to add a picture. Create a macro that we can actually add and browse for a particular picture. I think I've got some on my desktop here. If I decide that I want to add a picture, downloads, I got some more pictures in here. Okay, so how do we do that? Okay, here's one. So we could just put any picture. So we can see we can easily add a picture onto that. So how do we do that? If I decide not to save this employee, it won't be updated. So if I select on it again, it won't save, which is good. So we can add a picture and display that picture. How do we do that? Okay, well, let's take a quick look inside here. The first thing what we're going to be doing is we're going to be deleting any employee picture that might exist. We want to check, I want to make sure that we have a mobile data folder, right? I need to put those pictures inside our folder, right? Any employee pictures that we add must go in here. Not this one, this is our test one. But anyone must go inside here. Employee timesheet tracker has to go inside these employee images, right? So notice that we just added those two. They got put in there. So we need to make sure that we have that folder, and that folder is located right here. So that we're going to run that check to make sure that we have that. If not, we're going to browse for another one. Okay, we're going to set that picture folder, that mobile data folder inside a variable here. I'm also going to add in employee images here because that's exactly the folder that we want to save our employee images. Okay, we're going to set the employee picture to be called application file picker. We're going to set some filters. We only want pictures in this case. Please select an employee picture. And then what we're going to be doing is if it's nothing, we're going to go to no selection. We want to take that selected, and I want to check if the picture is already in the folder where we want to move it, there's nothing we can do, nothing we need to do. So if the location, its current location already equals the destination of where we want to move it, if it's the same, then we can skip to copy it over. Right? We don't need to copy it into the same location if it's already there. Okay, however, if it's not, what I want to do is I want to check for something that might be the same name, right? If there is one that does have the similar name to that, I want to make sure that we delete it. So delete if it's an existing. Okay, next up, I want to copy that. I'm going to use file copy. I want to copy the picture from its existing location into the brand new picture folder where we've designated that. That's very important because that particular folder, our app will recognize all the pictures in that folder. So assuming that we understand that, then we can move on. Now what we want to do is I want to take the name of that, and here's where we want to add that slash. I want to put that, notice here, keep that in mind, that's backslash here. This is the forward slash. This is counterintuitive, but our app looks for forward slashes, not backslashes. Our app looks for that. So employee images forward slash, right? Here's a backslash because we're browsing for it. I need to find it. I need to put it in a folder or normal backslash. Here's a forward slash. We're saving it as a forward slash because our app will recognize this. I made that mistake a few times. So placing that file name directly here. Yes, we want inside our employees here, we want to make sure that it's saved with employee images / in the name. Then when we view it, of course, we're going to replace this with a backslash when we're actually viewing it. Okay, I'll show you that in a moment. So we're saving it, file name here. And then also what we want to do is once we have that, we want to show the macro. I want to run a macro. Let's escape out of there. I want to then run the macro that's actually going to show that picture. And that's what we're going to do next. Show employee picture, right? We can also clear the picture, simply deleting the picture and clearing the contents out of B6. That, of course, is the macro that we have tied to this button here. So when I clear that picture, it's going to clear the picture. Okay, and of course that doesn't, remember, we're not saving it. If I save the employee, right, if I save it, then it will be saved. So we can add a picture. Here, it's not going to save it to that unless I click, and I'd rather not save it, so we'll just click here. We'll reload that employee, and the picture will come back because we did not save those changes, which is what we want. Now I want to display that picture, right? Employee pictures, okay? First of all, to display any picture, we're going to, of course, delete any picture that might be there. We're going to check the mobile data folder, making sure that we actually have a mobile data picture because that's where of course, our picture is going to come from. I'll make sure that you get all these sample pictures and all the icons, and I'll make sure to put them in our resources for our Patreon members. So if you would like to join our Patreon, please do. We've got tons and tons of great features on that. I've got early bird specials. We've got PDF code books. We've got we've got a feature, fix, or focus video, a brand new video every single week. Last week we created recurring invoices. We created recurring payments for our accounts payable. So that was really cool. So keep that in mind. Patreon. I'll include the link down below if you'd like to sign up for our Patreon membership. Just a few dollars a month. All right, and that would support us a lot. Picture folder, okay, that's going to be, set that as a mobile data folder. And then, of course, we're going to use that backslash. Here's where we're going to change it. Remember, I cannot use the / to browse for that, but / is critical for our mobile data. So here's what we're going to do. That file path, it's going to be that picture folder. Then we're going to use the replace. Whatever's in B6, I'm going to replace that / with a backslash. That's going to get us that proper file path so that we can insert it. And that's exactly what we're going to do next, as long as we have a correct file path. We want to make sure it's correct. We're going to insert that file path, and we're going to give it a name called employee picture. Then what we're going to do is we're going to focus on that. I'm going to lock the aspect ratio. I'm going to ensure if the width is greater than the height. I'm going to set the maximum width of 90. I'm also going to set the maximum height of 80 if the height is greater. Okay, we're going to set the left position based on 05, and we're going to set the top position based on 05. However, I want it centered. Notice how this picture is perfectly centered. I want it centered between column O and P. So what I need is the width of column O and P, and I also need the width of the picture. I'm going to divide the width of, I'm going to subtract the width of OP. I'm going to subtract the width of our picture, and then I'm going to divide it by 2. That's going to get us equal distance on both the left and the right side. So we're going to take the left. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take the width of that column. We're going to subtract out the width of the picture. We're going to combine that, and then we're going to divide that by 2. That's going to put equal distance on either side. We're going to do the same thing with the height. We're going to take the height of rows 5 through 10. We're going to subtract out the height of the picture. We're going to divide it by 2, and that's going to center that picture vertically. And then we're just going to display it. That is it. Okay, entry load, we've already gone over that macro. Entry delete is relatively simple. If I want to delete a specific entry, all I need to do is click delete. Are you sure you want to delete this entry? I need to make sure that it's both deleted from the datasheet and the local, and it's going to be deleted, and then we're going to add the new one. So how do we do that? Well, we want to make sure, if we start with a confirmation message, are you sure you want to delete this entry? Yes or no. Okay. For deleting entries, I want to make sure that B3, if B3 is not empty, why would B3 be empty, right? If it has not been saved before, if I click a new one, new entry, and I decide that I want to put an employee in, I want to put some information in here, but I decide I don't want to save it and I want to delete it, notice B3, there's no entry row assigned to it. So if I delete that entry, all it's going to be doing is just simply clearing out the contents. We don't need to update any database, right? So if B3 is empty, then all we need to do is go to not save. We can skip everything and go down here. However, if it is not empty, we notice it already has been saved in the database. And then what I need to do is extract that database row from B3, and I need to delete it. So if the entry row, I just don't want to delete row 2 because that row is important for, the reason is we don't want to delete row 2 is because notice I have formulas here and formulas here and formulas here. I don't want to delete row 2. Okay, keep that in mind. So anything after that is fine. Okay, so as long as it's not row 2, I want to then delete that entire row. And I also want to do the same exact thing for the data. Remember, everything we do to our local workbook, we must do to the data workbook. So the data workbook, we're going to get that data file. Of course, if it's accurate, we're going to open that data file. We're going to look on the timesheet, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. Same row. We're going to delete that, of course. And then that's it. We're simply going to close our data file and then make sure we save those changes with true. All right, entry new. Then all we need to do is just run the macro that has a new entry, which is simply going to clear out all the fields. We went over that, and then reload that time entry list, right? I want to reload this list here so that the one we deleted is not existing in there. All right, very, very cool. Now we have a really cool macro called print log. This log actually should have been print log. Let's see, this probably should have been in our time log. I thought we put it here. Should be here. We've got, yeah, that's the one I want. Okay, so time entry, we don't need this. That we don't need because we've got already save and update, employee save and update. That's very simple. All we're going to be doing in that, when we save the update, we're simply going to save that both inside our existing, right? I'm going to go quickly over this one because it's not an integral part. Saving it's going to save both to this database. If it's a new employee, we're going to save it to a new row. If it's an existing, we're simply going to update it. We're going to do the exact same thing with our data workbook. Remember, our data workbook here inside our timesheet also has an employee list here. So we're going to do exactly the same thing here, simply adding or updating it. It's going to become basically a duplicate. Great. So that's all we need to do here, just basically with the employee, save and update employee, making sure that if it's a new employee, we're going to add new rows also to our data workbook. I know I'm moving fast, but this is not an integral part. We're already along on this. If it's an existing employee, we're just going to extract the row from B10. We're going to make updates of all the fields, both in our local database here and in our mobile database here. So we're doing both of those. And that's it. And we're going to just run that fade out message to save the employee. That is it. Okay, very cool. We've got a lot to cover on this, so let's move ahead. So also what I want to show you quickly is notice that we have view the time log, right? I may want to view the time log for any given employee. I want to know all of the time entries for a particular month or for a particular date range based on a date range that we can set here. So we can set that. If I decide to make a change on that, I can set it. I want to automatically refresh it based on that. I don't have data in any of the months, so I'm not going to run that. So we got a pop-up calendar here. So when we make a change here, I want to run a macro that's going to load all the data here. Okay, so how do we do that? I'll check on this value here. So we'll check on that. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that we load all the information in from our database. So how are we going to do that? Well, it's going to come directly from our timesheet. And of course, we have criteria here. And we're going to move all the way over. And we're going to get some log results. Here's that issue here. And basically, it is because we don't have overtime hours, so we're calculating that. We need to add an if error when we do that. So we're going to do that right here, and I'll show you how. So basically, what we have is we have all the date and times and the hourly wages, and we want to make sure that if we have any overtime, we want it to be calculated, and we're going to bring those formulas down. Anytime we get values, we don't have values, we certainly want to wrap it in if error. Okay, if error here, in case, right, we don't have all the times located or we don't have overtime hours, we want to make sure we're doing it. Okay, so if error, we're going to wrap that in here. And then if there's an error, we're just going to use double spaces, and that's going to remove any errors. Okay, so the idea is here is to basically create a criteria for a given number of time, a specific employee, a specific date and time, and have those results come in here. Then I want to bring down some formulas, just as you saw here. The formulas are going to store it here. So when I'll go back into timesheet entry, and I want to, let's say we want to refresh this, we can just double click on this. It's going to refresh the data, and notice we don't have any other overtime. We should get this total pay. I'll double check that. So let's do that. So basically what I want to do is I want to know the selected employee, Mark, and I want to know I want to know all the time entries from a specific date to a specific date, and we're going to get this functioning. Okay, so we're going to create some criteria, and that criteria is located right here. Again, we're going to use that indirect formula just as we did before based on B5. That's going to put that mark. We know that B5 is the row that that employee selected, right? And if we indirect using column D, we're going to return that. I also want to know based on whatever the timesheet entries, W3, that's our time in, that's our date, and Y3 plus 1. I'm going to go over that in just a second, why that is. Notice we have W3 here. It's going to have to be greater than that. I also want to know any dates, including the last day of the month, April 30th. But remember, now we're focused on times here, right? What if I don't just want April 30th. I want anything up to 12 o'clock on April 30th. So basically, it has to be less than the next day, because any time entries on that day would be greater than that. So we want to make sure that anything is less than the next day. So inside our timesheet, that's just what I've done here. We're going to use less than, I should say, whatever's in Y3, right, which is the last day of the month in this case, plus 1, right, plus 1. So I want anything less than the day after. And that's very important. Why is that? Because these have time. So if this was 4:30 at 5 o'clock, we want to make sure that we want it less than the next day, so it includes the times for that day. Okay, and I also want a value on here. I'm not going to use double quote. I'm going to use 0 here. So 0 is going to be good. So we want to run that. Now all we need to do is just make that update and just bring it over, and that's going to bring over our balances here, which is exactly what I want. So now we have that. So what we're going to be doing is once our advanced filter brings in that information from our original data, I then want to calculate the total regular hours, the total overtime hours. I want to know the total regular and the total overtime pay, and I want to know the total pay, and I want to bring those. So we're going to use formulas to do that. I want to make sure that both W3 and X3 contain values, right? W3 and X3, I want to make sure we have a time in and we have a timeout. If we do, we're going to use the same formula. We're going to subtract our timeout minus our time in, and then we're going to multiply it times 24. If it's greater than our regular hour, if it's greater than 8 hours, I just want to put 8 hours. Otherwise, if it's less, then all we're going to be doing is subtracting out the date timeout minus the date time in, multiplying it times 24. That's going to create it. Notice this one was over. Over time, we're going to use the same exact calculations as we did right here inside our calculations here. Remember, we went over overtime right here. We're going to use the same formulas that we did before. So inside our timesheet, we're going to make sure that we're going to check if it's over our regular hour limits. We're then going to display it minus our regular. So I want to know how many overtime hours. I don't want to know total hours. I want to know only the overtime hours. So we're calculating all the hours and we're subtracting out our limit. Otherwise, we're just going to show empty. Okay, and we could probably put 0 here. Okay, just to make sure it calculates properly. Okay, and so I want to know the total regular hours, and which is very simple. And I want to know also the total. What is the overtime? How much time? So here for our regular, all we're multiplying is our regular hours minus the hour times the hourly wage. Our regular pay is our total regular hours in column Z times our hourly wage and Y. That's going to get us our regular. Our overtime is slightly different, right? Our overtime calculations are, we're going to take Y3, which is our hourly rate, and we're going to multiply it times our overtime rate. We're going to multiply that times the number of overtime hours in AA. Okay? If there's an error, we're going to throw 0. If there's an error, we're going to show 0. That's going to calculate. We're putting this all up here. When our advanced filter, our results come here, we're going to take these formulas and we're going to bring them down right here. There's no need to have formulas if we don't have any data. Okay, so that's what we're going to do inside the macro. Once we have all the data here, we can then bring it directly over inside our data view time log here. It's going to bring it all over in here. Okay, so that's how we're going to do that inside there. So let's take a look inside our time log macros. And we're going to go all the way up. First thing we want to do is show or hide. We have a single macro that's going to both show or hide. You saw that macro, you saw it in action. When we hide it, it's going to hide it. And when we show it, we're going to show it. All we're simply doing is hiding and showing some columns. We're showing columns S through Z when we want to show the timeline, and we're hiding it and we're showing it. Also, what we want to do is we want to show and hide this group of shapes. The time entry, this is called time entry group. We have another one in our time log, and that's called time log group. So we want to show and hide those logs. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be running a test. If column I is visible, we know that we are currently in the edit mode for the entries, and we want to show the time log. However, if column I is hidden, we know that our current view is the time log and we should hide it. Okay, so that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to check using column II. If it's false, if hidden equals false, then we know that the entries is visible and we need to hide it and show the time log. So the first thing we want to do, the time entry group, we're going to make that hidden. We're going to hide that using visible equals false. Then if there's a picture, we're going to hide that. If there's an employee picture, we're going to hide it. If there's no picture, we create an error. So we've wrapped it around on error and resume next. And then what we want to do is we want to show that time log group. I want that visible. I also want to hide the entry columns, columns I through R. We want hidden equals true. And I want to display the time log columns, S through Z. We're going to be displaying that. And then I'm going to automatically run the macro. That's the next macro we're going to go over here to refresh that. Otherwise, we're simply going to hide that, right? Otherwise, we're in this screen here. We are going to hide everything and show our time entries. So hide the time log and show the entries. Again, shapes time entry group visible equals true. We want to show that time entry group, and I want to hide the time group here. I also want to show an employee picture if it's available. Again, we're doing the opposite of the columns, and this time we're making I through R visible, meaning hidden equals false, and we're going to then hide the time log by hidden equals true. That's it. That's all we have to do to just change that. Next up is the time log refresh. We kind of went over this a little bit of the idea. We understand we're going to be determining the last row of our data. We're going to run an advanced filter based on some criteria that we've already set here, S1 through U2. We're going to have those results come in here from W through Y. Then what we're going to be doing is determining the last row. We're going to copy down these formulas all the way to the last row. We're going to bring all this data inside our screen, and that's exactly what we're going to do inside this little bit of a macro. First, we're going to clear the contents of the time entry, right? We want to make sure to clear any data here, clearing all that data out. Then what we want to do is focus on our timesheet database. We're going to, again, clear the contents of our previous results. I also want to clear the contents. I want to clear everything from W3 all the way through AD. I want to clear all of that out. And then also we're going to then run our advanced filter, getting the last row, making sure that we have data. A1 through H is our original data. We're going to run our criteria S1 through U2, just as I had explained here, S1 through U2, that's our original data. And of course, our results are going to come directly inside W2 through Y2. We're going to determine the last row based on column W. Assuming that we have data, we're going to bring down those formulas, right? All the way from Z3 through AD in the last results row. We're getting those formulas directly from Z1 through AD1. We're getting those formulas directly here, and we're simply bringing them down here, however many rows we need. Then all we need to do is our last step is simply bring the information over from W3 through AD in the last row, and we're going to bring that information directly inside the time entries. So when I simply run this macro, it's going to bring all the data in here, and then we're going to bring it, that brings it all the way in here, so we have our data. Next up, what I want to do is I want to print the log. If I click print, I want it to print it to the default printer, and it's going to print it out right here. So all I need to do is determine the last row and set it to default printer. That is the next macro we're going to go over, which is called time log print. And with the time entries, we're going to determine that last row based on column S. Right? Column S is where our last row of data is, right? And then what I want to do is I want to set that page area, right? It's going to be S4 through Z in the last row. Print out true to the default printer, and we want to honor those print areas. Now, also, we notice we have some custom forms here. We have employee time log, Mark Mason from 412. So that header is a custom header. And we also have a sum here, summing all of our total pay. So this custom header is simply using the indirect, just as we did before, B5. That's going to get us that employee name. Then all I want to do is get the dates from W3, the from dates, and the to dates from W3. And I just want to format them accordingly using the text command. That's going to get us our custom header here. So that means as we change it here, notice everything changes here and we get automatically refresh. All right, very cool, very cool. All right, let's go ahead and do this. Before we get to this time scheduler, we're going to go over that. That's a relatively easy macro. There's one more thing that I want to show you on the application before we go to that. On the app itself, remember, now we've covered how we get information from our data into our app, but how do we get data from our app, updates from our app here into Excel? Well, we can use some automation for that. Automation with a little help from Integromat. So we can set up some automation here. Inside here, we've set up a bot. You click New Bot. I've already done that. Created a bot called Timesheet Update. And basically, anytime Timesheet database is either added, a brand new one, or is updated. So this particular one is going to cover, right, for both new and updated. Why is that important? Because right? When I create a clock in, when I do this, this is going to be a brand new row, a new clock in, a new project, right? So we want to make sure to encompass both new and updates. So automation must cover new and updates. So when I do that, we're going to affect a specific, we're only focused on the timesheet table. And so what do I want to happen? So once a timesheet is updated, I want to create something. What do I want to do? Well, I want to create a text file and I want to use a webhook to do it, right? So we're just going to go through the step, right? First step is is when a timesheet is updated, then what do we want to do? We want to run a new process. We want to create a text file, right? And what do we want to do with that? How are we going to do it? We're going to call it send a webhook. We're going to click here, send, call a webhook. And we need to get a webhook, right? And a webhook is going to create an event. So basically what I want to do is I want to create a file inside Dropbox, right? Everything's, and I want that file to be located inside here. So I'm going to put that right inside here, inside something called app data. And I want it to come up here. How is that going to happen? Well, all I need to do is go ahead and make a simple update. So when I click on the UX here, and let's go into somebody who's already been clocked out. We'll go ahead and clock out Larry David, or I'm going to click clock out. It's going to clock him out automatically. I'm going to save those changes. It's going to refresh that. And what that's going to do is automatically create a text file. That text file is going to contain some very important data that's going to allow us to update. And so we take a look here and we just refresh that. It'll take just a moment. And it's called entry 14. Entry 14, it just created this text file. This text file is going to have all the data we want. So we have the employee name, and then we have a column separator. We have the project name here, another separator here. I've got the date that he clocked in. I've got a separator here. And I've got the clock out date here. So that's what I want to do. Then I want Excel, our macro, to read this and put that data inside where it belongs. Now, how do I know? I know it is project number 14, right? So if I take a look inside our Excel application here, go to Timesheet, and I go to project 14 here, we see Larry Daniels. We see, of course, yet not the date time. It's not here, right? So we don't have any information here. However, if I decide I'm going to then go to mobile data and I sync that mobile data, I want that automatically to be synced. So if we go back into the timesheet now, we see it's just been added. And of course, that data file is gone here. So how do we do that? Very, very quickly. All right, so we'll take a look at that. We're going to use this, what's called Integromat. Integromat, we've gone over this before if you follow my videos. If not, it's a great, great application. Integromat's going to help us create that webhook. What we're going to do is going to take that information, and basically it's going to send some information into our Dropbox file in the form of a text file. So back inside the automation where we were calling a webhook, okay? And what we want to do is we want to preset and we want to create a URL. How do we get that URL? Well, we can do it from this Integromat. If we were to create a brand new scenario, if you want to create a webhook, just click here and then type in webhook. And we scroll down here and we see something called webhooks here. We want to create a custom webhook here. What that's going to do is going to assign a brand new webhook as soon as we add a name. So we can add any name, we call it test or whatever we want, or we can spell it right if we want, but that probably doesn't matter. Then we're going to save it, and what that's going to do is create us a brand new webhook. So you're going to get this webhook and you're going to copy it. And then what you're going to do is you're going to paste it directly in here. I'm not going to change this, okay? So once we have that, what we want to do is we want to create a post. And we want content type is JSON. Then what we want to do is we want to create a body type. We want to know what type of data we want, right? We want to get some information here. You can customize this and we can view it. So let's take a look at this view here. We can download this in a text file. And basically it's just a little JSON file. So I'm going to double click here and we're going to see that what I want. So if you want to edit the information, here's the name of the file. I want that log ID, and I want it to come in here. Here's the data. This is what the data would look like. This is the label. So all the information you want, just create a JSON file. You can create a sample one. We may not need all this. I probably don't need hourly wage. I don't need this because our application is calculated. So I really don't need that. All I really need is this, 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 and this, right? I just need log ID, name, project, time in and time out. That's it, date and time out. I don't need this, but I just put it in anyways. So if you don't know how to create one, it'll create one for you and then you can customize it, right? You can click create and it'll create one for you. Then you can customize it, okay? Upload it in your Dropbox and make sure that you can browse for it, right? So if you click here, right, you can browse for it to locate that JSON file inside your Dropbox file. Once you have it, that information is very important, okay? Everything else you can set. So we've set that up, right? And we're going to save that. And now what we want to do is go back into Integromat, and we're going to take that new text file, and we're going to create a Dropbox file from it, right? So we're going to create a webhook. And I'm going to go back into this. And then next up, what we want to do is create a Dropbox file. So we're going to click here. And then what we want to do is search for something. So I want to search for Dropbox. Once we find Dropbox here, what I want to do is I want to scroll down here. I want to create or overwrite a text file. And that's just what we have here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to close this out, and we don't need that. And I'm going to go directly back inside Tegromat. Didn't mean to close it out, but that's cool. So basically I've created a scenario, and that's the one we're going to go over now. And that's called this timesheet update here. So we've created these two modules here that we're going to go in. And so I have a webhook here, right? And I have that, and I've copied that, and I've placed that directly inside here. Notice this ends in BVG, and notice here, this also ends in BVG. So we know it's the same webhook. So what we're going to be doing is you're going to click on Run Once, right? Once you do that, it's going to send information into your webhook, right? If I click Run Once, let's take a look at what happens. When's it going to happen? It's going to happen when I make an update, any update to any type of a timesheet. So when I click UX or any other screen, right? Let's say I want to make an update. Let's say I clock somebody in, okay? Let's say Peter here. Peter's got a project here, and then we're going to clock him in. We're going to click confirm. Okay, so that's a kind of change. As soon as I click the refresh, we're going to see that change. It'll take just a moment, but you're going to see that information come over. There it is, okay? We're going to take a look at what came in. That information is all, remember, that JSON information, log ID 17, name Peter, project, date and time in. There's no timeout, there's no hours, so that's fine. We don't need this. But here's the information that came in. So what I want to do is I want to take this information that came in and I want to create a text file. So that's just what we have here in Dropbox. Create or overwrite a text file right here. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing what I want to do is to go into Dropbox, connect your Dropbox account. We're going to select overwrite. We're going to map a file path. Where do we want to put that text file? Well, for me, I want to put it directly in a folder called application data. I want to put it inside my Dropbox. So we want to make sure we copy all this application and make sure the slashes. Notice, look at this. Keep in mind, this messed me up a lot. It'll probably mess you up. Notice in your file structure, you're using backslashes, right? We're using backslashes. However, inside here, we're using forward slashes. So it wants forward slash. We don't want the Dropbox. This is where your Dropbox starts. App sheet, data, forward slash, employee time tracker, application data. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a specific name, a very unique name. I'm going to call it a name called that text file. I want to say entry, and then I want to put the log ID. I want to know what the ID, that's the same as our entry ID. It's called log ID or entry ID, same thing. That is the ID of that file, right? That's the same ID as this one right here, right? That's the one I want to give it a name. I'm going to extract that, okay? So we're giving it that name, and once we have given that name, I want to add some data. So now what I would do is I want to add all the data. I want to put, what are the contents of that text file? First thing, I want to put that project name, and I want to separate, or I need to know to separate that data with /C/. Then I want to put the project, then another /C/. Then I want to put the time in, then I want to put the date. That's the same exact format as you saw inside our application data. It's exactly the same. So when we get the data, we see the name, the project here, separator, and the time in. Of course, we don't have a timeout on this one because we just clocked somebody in. So that's what we want to do. We want to bring that into Dropbox. So as soon as we have it, what it's going to do is going to create that file inside our Dropbox. Save your changes and make sure you turn it on. Okay, once it's on, every time we make a change to this or a brand new record, it's going to add that file into Dropbox inside here. Once we have it in Dropbox, our macro will update our records automatically, and that's the macro we're going to go over right now. So let's take a look inside that. We can bring this down. We don't need to see that. And what I want to do is I want to go in. So I want to update this database according to that. So we can do that with a macro. So let's take a look inside that macro, and it's going to be called, we've got one called application macros, and we're going to use this macro called update from app data, update from app data. It is the same macro that's tied to this button right here. So inside that macro, we're going to set some variables here, and we'll go over them as we go. We also want to know that data file. That's very, very important. That data file is going to be located in admin and the application data. Remember, this is where that folder where our application data is. I want to make sure it's accurate. If it's not, let the user know to check it out. We're focusing on the timesheet, right? That's the timesheet. That's where we want to update that data. I want to set the file. So basically what I want to do is I want to run a loop inside this folder. For every single text file, I want to update it. I want to get that ID. I want to know what is that ID is 17 on this file. So I want to extract that ID because that ID is very important because I need to know what row to place that in. In this case, if it's 17 doesn't exist here, I know it's going to be in a brand new row. Okay? Okay. So very important here. So first thing what we want to do is get that file name. It's going to be the directory of the file, txt. So basically, we're going to run a loop. For every single file that ends in txt, I want to do something with it. We're going to set the data file path to the full file path of that file. I also want to extract the entry ID. Remember, how do I know it? If I remove the word entry and underscore, if I remove that from the name and I also remove the .txt, it's going to leave us with that entry ID. I really need that entry ID so I can find what row is. If it's not found, I simply add a new row. So we're going to look for that right now. We're going to wrap in on-air resume next, and on-air go to 0. And we're going to look for that. We have a named range called entry ID. We're going to look for that in that column and see if it's found. If it's not found, it's going to be 0. Then what we need to do is add a brand new row. So that entry row is going to be the first available row. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that ID and we're going to place it in column A. And this is only if it's new. Everything else is going to be whether it's new or existing. What we're going to do is we're going to open that path and we're going to put all the data inside that, all of the data inside that text file directly in a single string. We're going to call that entry data. That means everything inside this data file here, all that is going to be in a single string. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate that. I'm going to split it. I'm going to put it into an array. I'm going to split it using this delimiter, \C /C /. Okay, so that's what we're going to do right now inside the code here. So we're going to, once we have that, we're going to split it. We're going to put it into an array, entry data array. We're going to split it using that specific delimiter. Okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a loop, right? I need to take all the information here from column 2 all the way to column 5, and I need to update all that. We've already updated this one or added it. I want to update from 2 to 5. So we're going to run a loop from 2 to 5, updating it if it exists, if the information exists. So for entry column equals 2 to 5. Cells, right, we're focused on the timesheet. We know the row. The entry column, we know 2 to 5, is going to equal basically the array data. Now the array data starts at 0. So if we know our first entry column is 2 and our first data value is 0, we know to subtract 2. So that's going to add or update through this loop all 4 columns, right? 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? All 3, whether it's name, project, date, time. It's going to update that. Once we're done with that, we can clear out the file name and we can delete that text file. We're done with it. We don't need, I also want to know how many files were updated. So we're going to run an entry count. We're going to loop through this for every file. And then once it's done, we're going to use a message box. We're going to let the user know how many files have been updated. Have been updated, probably should put or added, right? Because we're adding new ones. All right, great. So we've done that and that's all we need to do. So when we run this macro, right, it's automatically going to update it, and notice if we have a brand new one, it just added that brand new one right here. Very, very cool. So we've shown you a lot. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at this really cool schedule. Notice that we want to be able to track times, right? We've been over a schedule similar to this, but I want to know, basically what I want to do is I want to run another loop. I want to know either all projects or specific projects for a specific month and then for a specific year. And I want those particular time entries to show up, and I want them to show up in the color that we've set inside the admin, right? If we change the color here, I want to know quickly how we can do that. So if they've been clocked in, I want to show that, simply changing the color here. And then if we refresh the schedule, I want to make sure that those schedules automatically get reflected here, both in the legend and on the particular job. So notice they've been clocked in here, right? As soon as they clocked out, right, it will automatically change. So if I clock this guy, let's use 22nd, let's do the same date. And then let's say they clock out at like 9 p.m. And then I want saving that entry. I want to make sure that automatically that gets reflected on the time sheet schedule here. So when I refresh that, we see that that particular icon now goes to green because it's been clocked out with regular time. They've been clocked out at overtime. So basically I have 4 different types of shapes, right? Inside the admin, if they're clocked in but not yet clocked out, if they're clocked in but they're reaching their overtime limit, I want to know that. Let's put that back to green, probably something a little more visible. Okay, but if they're clocked in and they're reaching their overtime limit, I want to know that, and I want that to reflection. If they're clocked out and they've clocked out without any overtime, I want that color. If they're clocked out but they've exceeded regular time and now and have overtime, I want that to be reflected. So I want all 4 of those to be reflected. And I want it to be reflected with not only colors, but very specific icons. I've got very specific icons in this particular folder here called icon folder. And if we take a look inside, I'll include those icons, and I've got those icon folders right here. Okay, so I've got some icons here, and those icons are all located here. So we can see some, they're around here somewhere. Clock out, and then we have clock in here. So we've got a few different ones. They're all, this one's clock out overtime. So I've got them icons there in white. They're all located in this folder. I'll make sure Patreon members get those. And also we can put them here. So when we combine this file path with this, we get the names. And I want those icons to appear directly inside our legend. So as we update it, when I click refresh, I want to make sure that the legend gets updated, the icons get updated, and everything happens. And also the time entries get reflected here. So how are we going to do that? Well, of course, with a macro. So let's go ahead and show you that macro. And we're going to go inside the scheduling module here. And we're going to go scroll all the way up here into schedule refresh. That is the macro that's going to run when we set that button. And basically all we're going to be doing is, of course, running another advanced filter. And that advanced filter is going to be based, of course, on the same data information. But this time we're going to run, here we have scheduling information here. So we've got a project. Here's our criteria for the schedule. I'm looking at anyone that's greater than or equal to the month start. How do we know the month start? Well, that's based on a date here. Based on right here. If we take a look inside here, formula equals B4. So this is the month start. This is a named range called month start. If I do previous month, this will change. The month number will change. If I go next month, the month will automatically change. So we'll see that this is our month start. So I also want to know the last day of the month. So we're going to set the last day of the month, but I also want it greater than or equal to the last day. So let's just take a quick look at that. Also want it end of the month start. I want to know the end of the month start, but I want to add 1. Why is that important? Because I wanted to include anything that is before the next date. So example, would be May 1st, right? Anything less than May 1st. This is what this basically is. Less than May 1st. That means anything that's April 30th at 11:59 p.m. would also show up here. So keep that in mind. So that is what we're going to be using. And we want to filter. Then I want those results to come here. I want to know all the information, but I want to know more than that, right? I want to know, so we need to have some formulas. I want to know the regular hours, the overtime hours, the total regular hours, the total overtime, the total pay, and I want to set a status based on that. And that status is going to be based on a formula. Okay, we've been over these formulas, overtime, regular, total pay. We've been over those, but this one I want to go over now. So basically what I want to do is I want to determine through formula which status is correct. Have they been clocked out, overtime, regular time? Are they not clocked out yet? So we can do that with an if statement. Okay, so first thing what I want to do is determine if they've been clocked out. So if AN3 equals empty, if two conditions, AN3, if they have not been clocked out yet, AN and 3, of course, the row will be variable, will be empty, right? And that along with, I also want to know if when they clocked in, notice when they clocked in, the current date and the current time minus the time that they've clocked in, is it less than or is it greater than the regular hours? In other words, if they clocked in at 10 a.m., right, and it's now 6 p.m., or let's say it's 7 p.m., and they haven't clocked out yet, we know we're beyond 8 hours, right? I want to know, are we beyond 8 hours? However, if it is less than the regular hour limit, then put in the admin C11. Now, just so you know, we'll go over this real quick. Admin C11 is clocked in normally, clocked in, but they're already in overtime, clocked out, including regular time, or clocked out and they incurred overtime, right? So those are the 4 ones. So those are the ones. So if they have been clocked, they have clocked in, but not yet reaching overtime, C11, right? So that's going to be our clocked in, right? Clocked in. Let's just use that clocked in regular time. And so let's say clocked in. And then, however, what if also they still haven't clocked out yet, but the current date and time minus their clock in time times 24 is greater than or equal to the limit? Then I want to put C12. And C12, of course, is clocked in, but the limit has been reached. The limit has been reached, or overtime been reached, okay? So I want to know that. What else? There's also what if both AN3 does not equal empty and AQ3 equals empty, right? AN meaning they have been clocked out. However, AQ equals empty. What is an AQ? Well, AQ is, let's escape out of there. AQ is overtime, meaning they haven't incurred any, there's no overtime. So in that case, we know that they've clocked out, but there's no overtime. So in that case, will be admin C13, which is clocked out regular time. However, what if they've clocked out and they've incurred overtime? In that case, both A and 3, the clock out exists and overtime hours exist. Both of those are not blank. Then we would put them as clocked out with overtime, clocked out overtime. All right, so that's how we get the fours. Now, all we need to do is get our data, bring it down here. Then once we have the data, bring our formulas down here. And then what we determine the color and the icon by the status that's calculated by our formula. That's exactly what we're going to do inside the macro. So this is the schedule refresh. After we've dimensioned a bunch of statements, we don't need this probably. Clear all existing entry shapes, right? If there's any shapes here, if we take a look inside the schedule, I want to clear all these shapes out. Anything that says entry item group 4, right? We've created a group. Basically, it's the shape and the icon together combined to a group. I want to delete everything, delete all those, right? So we can do that with this. Entry item, anything that says entry item, delete. Anything with icon, delete, right? So we're going to loop through the entire sheet for every sheet if it includes the icon. And that means also these icons too here, these icons for our legend, because if we've made any changes in our admin screen, I also want to say icon 1, 2, or 3. So our icons are also going to get deleted here. That means our legend's going to get updated. So we have that here. So we're going to loop through basically clearing out all that. Then what I want to do is I want to clear out inside the schedule. I want to clear out all of our names, right? I want to have, maybe we've made updates to employees' names, so I want to clear out all the employee names. Then what I want to do is I want to get the unique list of employee names, right? Bringing it in here. Now in the future, something you could add, you could make employees active or inactive and then have an option to show active, or you could put an option up here to show only active employees. That might be kind of helpful. You know, it's something we could do in the future. So keep that in mind, that's some ideas. But basically for our purposes, all we're going to do is take all these names and bring them directly over into the schedule. So once we've cleared them out, what I want to do is I want to determine the last employee row based on the employee sheet. And then as long as it's not less than 2, we can bring all the employee names over into the schedule. Now what I want to do is I want to get all the icons from, of course, our admin screen, right? And we have our icon names here. I want to combine our icon folder along with our icon names, and I want to put those icons directly inside our scheduling sheet. I want to put them in the legend. I want to place them directly located right here inside. Let's view our heading so we can see our heading. So I want to place them directly inside AJ4 all the way through AJ7, placing them there. So we can do that with the following kind of code. So we're going to do with icon number. First of all, I want to make sure that we actually have an icon folder. It's going to be admin D7, making sure that we have an accurate folder for our icons. Once we can loop through, we have a maximum of 4 icons. So we're going to loop from 1 to 4. And then with the schedule AJ and the icon number, I want to get the interior. Basically, what I want to do is I want to take whatever interior color is located inside our admin screen, and I want to place it directly as the interior color. So I want to look at the interior color here, and I want to duplicate it for the interior color inside our schedule right here in AJ4. So that's what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is AJ, the interior color of AJ and 3 plus the icon number, is simply equal to the admin icon number plus 10. So icon number is 1 here. The icon number is 1, of course. So this would be row 4. This would be row 11, right? This would be row 4 here. This would be row 11 here. And that's why we're adding those two. All right, so once we have those colors added up for our legend, we can then add our icons. So we're making sure that we have an icon name in column D and 10 right inside that. I want to make sure that we've got an actual icon name, making sure it's not empty. I want to set a file path for that icon. So the icon path is simply going to be the icon folder with a backslash along with the name of that icon. That's going to create that full file path. We're going to make sure it's accurate. If it is, then I'm going to insert the picture, insert that icon. I'm giving them a very specific name called icon and icon number. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the schedule. I'm going to place those icons directly in column AJ. This should be AJ, but it doesn't matter because it's top, not the column. AJ, but it wouldn't matter. AJ3 on top. So placing that right a little bit over to the right and a little bit above under the top of the row there, and placing that in and just giving it a very specific item. So it's going to place all those icons directly inside here, right on column AJ, placing them here. So once we have those icons, that's it. So we've got our legend. That's going to help us because it's important, because when I have a job, if I run into something that's clocked in, I want to make sure that that one's clocked in. It looks like we don't have any that are clocked in. Let's create something that's clocked in so we can have all those. So we'll do a new entry. We'll create, let's see, Mark, and we'll go ahead and clock him in on the 23rd and give him a specific time. And we're just going to give it a project here. So we want to make sure that he's clocked in. I need to add a time on that. Then we'll 1 o'clock and then done here. Okay, and we're going to save that. Save, then all we're going to do is just simply update that schedule and refresh that schedule, and that's going to clock him in on the 23rd, and it's right here. Clocked in. I don't like that clock. It should be a little bit brighter, right? It's kind of hard to see. Let's put it like this. That's better. I like it. It's very, very flexible. You can quickly make changes very easily and just refresh the schedule. Both the legend, there we go. So we see that it's been clocked in now. If we click it, it's automatically going to go to that. So we see he's been clocked in now. We've got that unique icon and the unique color. So now we're going to focus on the timesheet database. Now we're going to basically get all the information here. We've seen inside our database, we've seen how we have the criteria. We know how we get the criteria. We've got a project here. Project, we can do project. Basically, the project is going to be based on our drop-down list, right? We have a project draw. I know I'm moving quick, but there's a huge application, right? I create these in 3 days, so it takes me a while. So what we're going to do is read a format control on this. We see that it's called, based on the input range, project with all. So we have a linked project, all of our projects here on this name, along with the all. And we also have the cell link of B13. So B13 is going to take on our project number, right? If it's 1, we know it's all projects. So then what I want to do is I want to put the name. So if error, I'm going to index project with all, otherwise it's 18. And basically what I want to do is whatever project we've selected here, if I select Fredder's Kitchen, whatever project we've selected, I want that name here. That's important. I'm going to use the index. I'm simply indexing this and placing it right here based on the number, based on the row number here. So basing it on there. So that's how we do it. So if we have a subway install, so we can have a very specific project and only show them. This particular project name, this, which is located here in B14, I want that displayed directly inside here, inside the project, so that when we run this criteria, only those projects for that would be displayed here, having that filtered out there. So we can do that with a formula. Basically, if the timesheet, if it's 1, meaning all projects, then just shows that does not equal empty. Otherwise, show very specifically in B14 that specific project name. That way, we run a filter. We only want to know those specific projects between these 2 dates, and we want to have those results come right here. Great. So what we want to do, so we understand that how we get this here, and so we can easily show that. And if it's all project, we're just going to show nothing, okay? And we've got a macro that's assigned to this, which is simply going to be that same refresh. So it is the same macro that's assigned to here. So any changes we make to this drop-down list or this drop-down list is going to be the same macro. Actually, we did the wrong macro here. Whoops. So schedule refresh here. This is the one I want to here. Schedule refresh. This one right here. That's the macro that I want to assign to it. Saving our work, continuing on. Now we're going to continue on with the macro. So once we have the results, what we're going to do is we're going to get those results right in here. Let's continue on with the code, determining the last row of data here. We want to make sure that we have last row. If it's no, we can exit out of the sub, clearing any of the contents. Remember, I want to really clear all of the data here before, especially with these formulas, I want to clear all that out. Now, keep in mind, when you're running an advanced filter, it tends to clear out only those original results, but I want the formulas too. So we're going to clear out everything all the way to column AU here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to run our advanced filter from our original data, having our criteria AF1 through AH. Remember, that's the criteria that we just spoke of, including the project and the date and time in here, AF1 through AH2. That's our criteria, and having those results come directly in here, AJ through AO in the row 2. Those results right here. We're going to determine the last row based on column AJ. If the last row is less than 3, we're going to exit the sub. Then what we're going to do is once we have our data, we know the last row, in this case it's 20. I'm going to take the formulas that's going to calculate all that information that we want and bring it down here. So bringing it all down here. And then once we have that, we are good to go. So this is going to bring down those formulas right here. Then we can turn off application screen updating. Then all I need to do is run a loop from 3 all the way to the last row and create shapes and icons for each of those and place those directly on our schedule. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to use the sample shape. I'm going to have this sample shape right here. It's called sample entry shape. It is this shape that I'm going to be duplicating to create all the shapes on the schedule. Great. So what we're going to do is we're going to run that loop. We're going to get that entry ID. Now, how do we know that entry ID? That entry ID is located in AJ, right? Our first row here, our first results located in AJ, that entry ID. So we're going to put that into a variable. I also want to get our employee name located in AK. I want to know the schedule date. I only want to know the date. I don't want to know the time. So to extract only the date only, we're going to use the integer function, and that's going to remove the decimal, which means removing the time. And that's going to come directly from AM. That's our date and time. I also want the status, right? The status is coming from AU. That's our calculated status here. This is our status. And I want to put that into a variable. Okay, what I want to do is I want to determine the icon number. I've got our status here, but how do I know which icon to use? Well, if I know the status, all I need to do is look up that status in here. Once I know what row it's been found, I know what icon to use here. Or I can simply say this is icon 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I know that this is icon 1. So we already have named our icons, right? We've already named our icons in our schedule here. If we look to our legend here, we see that this is icon 1 up in the name here, icon 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. So all we need to do is determine what row that is. So icon number is simply equal to the admin, the status, right? Fine, we're finding that status, and we're going to subtract the row. We're going to get the row of that and subtract 10. That means if it's the first one's found on row 11, the first one is found on row 11. If I subtract 10, I know that then I'll get 1. And if I know that the name clock in 1, if I know that icon is 1, right, icon 1's for clocked in. So back into that, I know if it's found, this is icon 1. So we've got the icon numbered. In this case, the first one might be 1. As long as it's not 0, then I want to assign an entry color. How do I know the entry color? Well, the entry color is simply going to be the icon number plus 10. It's going to get us that D is the entry color, whatever color that is. So we can do that here. So D and the icon number plus 10, combining them again, will get us row 11. The interior color of that cell in column D is going to get us that and put that entry color inside a variable called entry color. Okay, now we're ready to create this. Okay, so we're going to create the entry. The schedule row, I want to know what row the schedule is, right? I've got to know what row to place it, right? If we take a look inside the schedule, how do we know? We know we've got the employee name. All I need to do is look for the employee name. When it's found, I know what row to place it on. So our schedule row is going to be equal to the schedule, column D. We're going to find the employee name. Once we find it, we're going to assign a row, okay? Now what I do is I want to find a column, right? I've got the row. Now I need to where a column. How do I find the column? Well, I know if it's April 2nd, I know it's going to be on column F. Or if it's on April 1st, it's going to be on column D. So all I need to do is subtract out, if it's found, subtract out the date. So for example, April 1st is going to be on column 5, right? So all we need to do is add 4 to that, right? So the schedule column is simply equal to the day of the scheduled date, the first, second. So if it's on the 1st, if that scheduled date's on the 1st, this is going to be 1 plus 4 is going to be 5. Then I know it is column E to place it on. The schedule column is column 5. So now we're just going to run a check to make sure we have both a schedule row and a schedule column. If the schedule row is equal to 0 or the schedule column is less than 5, then go to next entry. That means there's been something wrong or we don't find the employee or something like that, so we can't place it. Okay, assuming that we do have everything we need, we can place that directly on the schedule. Scheduling shapes, we're going to copy that sample entry shape. That's that sample shape you saw. I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to assign it a very specific name. So the name is going to be based on entry and the ID. So here's the name. So we're going to place it, duplicate it. We're going to give it a name called entry item, and we're going to give it a name entry ID. Once it's duplicated, we're going to place it there, and we're going to focus directly with that specific new shape. We're going to give it a left position based on the scheduled row and the scheduled column left. I'm going to give it a very specific top position based on the scheduled row and the scheduled column, the top position. I want to give it a very specific width, right? The width is going to be the width, whatever the column width is, I want to do the width of the shape. So that width is set to the width of that column. The height is also the height of the column so that it fills in perfectly with that cell. I want to assign a macro, right? Because that's very important. When I click it, I want it to go directly to that item. So I want to assign a macro to that. I've got a macro. We're going to go over that next. But that macro is called select here, schedule entry select. And then what I want to do is I want to color that shape. So as long as the entry color is not empty, I want to fill that shape for color RGB with that entry color. Color the shape based on the status. So here we have color shape based on status. Good. Now that we've colored it, so what I want to do is I want to build a string, right? I want to add this. I want to create basically a group here. So I want to add the background shape along with the icon, put them together and create a group. So we're going to create a string that's going to help us do that. It's called entry item and entry ID. This is the same name that we assigned right up here. So once we have that, we can add the icons. As long as the entry status doesn't equal empty, we need a status, and the icon status doesn't equal, and the icon number is not 0. That means we have the proper icon, we have proper status. What we're going to do is we're going to create, remember that icon number. I want to duplicate. Remember, we've got icon 1, the icon number is 1, 2, or 3. So I know, right, we've already assigned it 1, 2, 3, or 4. I'm going to duplicate these legend icons using our legend to duplicate them. We're duplicating it. Then we're going to set a unique name called entry icon and entry ID. That's going to create a unique icon. Then what I want to do is focus on, I want to place that directly on the schedule. So basically I'm going to center that icon directly on, let's refresh it here. Oops, wrong month here. This month, okay. So what I want to do is I want to center that icon directly in the center of the column. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to set that left position based on the left position. Then we're going to add, I want to add the width of that entire column, and I'm going to subtract out the width of that icon, and then divide it by 2. That's going to center it. I also want to place it a little bit below the top. So we're going to add it on the top and then two pixels down. And then again, we're going to assign a macro also to the icon, that same macro that we've assigned to the shape. So same macro. Then we're going to build that group string, or that group string is going to be basically this plus this, and we're separating it by a comma. And the reason we do that is because I want to group those two shapes. It's only 2, but when we have a lot, it's easier. I'm going to set a group array. I'm going to split that string based on that comma, this comma right here. Of course, we could just create it. It's only 2 shapes, but sometimes it's a lot more. So this is proper to use. Then what we're going to do is we're going to group it and give it a name called entry item group, entry ID. Okay, and then we're just going to set the group string back to 0, right? It's going to reset that. And then we're going to do that for every single one. We're just going to loop that, and that's going to automatically build this cool schedule. Okay, but when we click on it, how do we automatically go to that? Well, when we click on it, what I need is that entry ID. I need to put that ID directly inside B2. Once I have that, I can simply load it. So that's the next macro. We're going to call it schedule entry select. We're going to set the entry ID as long, an entry row, and a selected row. The entry ID is going to use, remember, we're going to use application caller. If I select on a specific shape, now there's 2 shapes in here, right? There's either the icon, entry icon 13, or there is the back shape here called entry item. But notice both of those start with 9 characters. If I remove the first 9 characters of entry item or entry icon, it's going to leave us with the entry ID. That's what I want. I'll extract that entry ID. So to do that, what we can use is the replace function. Okay, so the entry ID is simply using the replace. I want to remove the first 9 characters. So we can use the left command. The application caller is the name of the shape that called the macro. So I'm going to take those first 9 characters. I'm going to replace them with nothing. What that's going to do is leave us with only the ID. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to place that directly inside the time entries. I'm going to place it in B2, just as I had mentioned. Then what I want to do is I want to make sure that we're showing the time clock entries. And what does that mean? That means that basically, if we're looking at the log, let's say we're viewing the time log, okay? If I select something on the time schedule here, I want to automatically go to that. So I want to make sure that if column I is hidden, I want to make sure to run the macro that's going to actually hide the time log, same macro. It's going to show this screen. So we're going to check if column I is hidden, then we're going to run the macro to show the time clock. Okay, now what we want to do, we don't need this twice. We're going to run the macro that loads that entry. This macro right here will load all the entry details. Load entry details. Great. So now what I want to do is once I've loaded that, just like I did before, I want to make sure I select on the right employee. I want to select on the right time shot entry automatically. Again, let's take a look at that inside here. So we're going to select, let's take a look at this employee, Anita Withers, right? On April 12th, I want to select it, and I want to make sure that Anita Withers gets selected. I want to make sure that the right entry gets selected, and I want to make sure that the right entry loads up. So to do that, what I want to do is I want to know that selected row. I want to get that employee name, right? We know the employee name is going to be based on J6. Whatever's in J6 is what we want to look for. I want to look for it in this column. If it's found, I want to take that and put that into a variable called selected row. If we take a look inside here, the selected row, we're going to extract that row using the find command, okay? Now, assuming that selected row is not empty, what I'm going to do is D and run select. So basically, when I do this action, it's going to trigger to load automatically. It's going to load those time entries. It's automatically, as soon as I select this, it's going to load those time entries here. So then what I want to do is I want to load all that up. So then what I want to do is I want to take B9 and I want to set that up. B9, I want to look for this. B9 is going to take on, B9, remember, is that selected row, row 6. So I want to select it automatically. So we're going to look inside E. We're going to look for B2. Again, just like we did before, I'm looking inside column E, right? If we take a look here, it's 9, right? So I'm going to look, whatever's in B2, I'm going to look for it in this column, right? It's actually on row 6. If it's found in row 6, I want to take that and put it directly inside B9. Okay, well, my voice. Okay, great. So we have that there. So that all we did, that's automatically selected. And then we can turn applicating screen updating to true, just in case that might help, in case I turned it off by accident. Let's turn it on. That is it. That's all we have to do. Now, the previous month and the next month and this month, all we're doing real briefly on that schedule, all I'm doing here is basically reducing this selected month. And then automatically, because this month start is based on B6 and B5, the year and the month, it automatically reduces. And then we just refresh the schedule. Next month, we're going to do the same thing here. And this month, we're going to do the same thing. And this month, all I'm doing is taking the current month. All right, that's it. That's all. I know the last few macros were pretty quick, but it's basically, we're kind of overtime. Again, as always, I think we're always overtime. I don't even know what time is, but we're always over, trust me. All right, well, that's great. I'm so happy you could join us for this really incredible training. What did you learn? Well, we learned how to create this really incredible mobile timesheet application, selecting on an employee, loading in their individual timesheets, loading in the picture, calculating overtime, calculating the number of hours, how we can set projects, how we can view the time entry log, and how we can print that and hide that time entry log, how we can select on individual time entries, how we can automatically select them, how we can automatically upload to a mobile data application, creating our own mobile data application on our thing, all the way with employees, with a clock in. Also, we can have our own scheduling inside that and clocked in. So we created our brand new mobile app and how we can customize that a little bit, how we can automate the data here so we can quickly automate any changes in that through Integromat, through a webhook into our Dropbox, and how we can bring that information back into our application. And of course, how we can create this really dynamic scheduler really with a cool legend. All right, great. It's been an incredible training. If you'd like to support us, I've got 200 of my best templates on sale right now. It is $77. Sometimes it's less, so you should definitely check that. I'll include the link down below. You can also get it now with PDF codebooks. It'll allow you to study those PDF codebooks, highlight them, and of course, they have a table of contents and a whole lot more. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week. Don't forget to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe, comment below, and we'll see you next week. Thanks again.